Welcome everybody to Flat Earth Nation, now known as Mudflood, was Armageddon, as the theology has taken over the name since I got kicked off of YouTube. But thanks for that in the long run. Psychedelics, mind control, culture creation from none other Prince Wilkerson, Dr. Mike Prince Wilkerson. His middle name's Princeton. He was the first hacker, and now he has broken new ground. I feel like he's using a lot of things that, 7 years ago I introduced to the world, except he's doing it on steroids, man. He's making it look like I did a very feeble effort. But I was trying to do the theology also, and this is brand new. And a lot of people know. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens, almost 100 people know I've been doing mushrooms for a month and trying all of these other things. I've never talked to Stellium about it. Have talked to his good friend who goes by Andreas Xerxes, recent Tartarians. And so I'm just so curious. Let's find out. I'll try to do some stop and drop, and I hope you can hear it. It's not playing yet. There we go. Something really trippy, huh?
That right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole? You can say that. I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up.
Welcome to Team Rabbit Hole Edition 236 with Stellium7, Titan Blood, adventurer, researcher, philosopher. Join the team as we get to know Mike, whether it's resets, giants, fractals, or mudfloods. This Virgo has lots under his cap to divulge for sure. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you officially. It's one of these internet things where I think Raphael cross-pollinated with some other people like Rodrigo, turned on to you, and then he said, let's get you on, so here you is. Something we do at the beginning of these episodes is correspond the number, which in this case is 236, is that right? Or what was it?
Yes, here we are.
Yeah, 236, yeah. That reduces down to 11, which is 2, the High Priestess. I offer up the mysteries of life. The High Priestess is about trusting your intuition, listening to your inner guides, understanding yourself better, listening to the music of the universe, and allowing your creative ideas to germinate. Raphael, what card do you have?
We have the angel number 50 of eloquence. Belonging to the principalities, this angel helps us to distinguish the possible from the impossible. It is associated with the 8 of Wands. The affirmation goes, I will release procrastination and just...
So, Stellium7, for the people that usually come to Mudflood was Armageddon, he's not a Christian yet. But he hasn't prayed to Jesus yet. He prayed to the universe, and he found the Heartstone. And then he kept finding the Heartstone, He's found a lot. And he is going to go to where whatever leads him. So, I don't know about this Gemini season. You're ruled by Virgo. I just know that while, I just got back from, taking care of business at the store, buying supplies. Get a run on your non-GMO peanut butter. The Walmart in Orange County, Texas is sold out. You have to eat that yucky Peter Pan that's non-GMO. So I bet Mike Prince Wilkerson was thinking, when am I going to get on here and talk about the rocks?
Things that have occurred as I've started to question different things throughout my life. So, yeah, and the other was it
Eloquence, well thought,
Eloquence.
structuring, and speech that attenuates the rigor of truth. So.
And like knowing what's real and not. Right? We're gonna be talking about some pretty heavy stuff probably.
Discernment.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So.
How do you know truth?
When we started the podcast, it wasn't my idea. Raphael was we had had conversations like this before this, I guess. And I was kind of asking some of the first ones. I don't know if they're up there or not, but some of the first just me and him talks were like, how do we know? Epistemological kind of questions, like how do we know what to trust? What is truth? How can we, in a postmodern kind of thing? So these are real important questions, and it's tricky turf because one man's genius is another man's madness or whatever, right? So I'm very prepared to enter into domains that I haven't explored much. Feel free. Well, no, we were talking about synchronicity. I think that's a good place to start, maybe. But before we jump into that, I'm curious about you personally. So tell us as much or as little as you like. About where you grew up. I think you were saying California, the culture. When did you kind of start tapping into magic, synchronicity, maybe noticing things that the other half don't see so much, so to say?
Oh, yeah. Well, just for starters, I've been in Europe now for 25 years, so I've spent almost as much time in Europe as I have in the States. But I did grow up in Southern California, and grew up in a little town called Ojai, which is about 90 minutes up the coast from LA, and then you turn right and head inland towards the mountains, and it's this beautiful little valley that's cradled by mountains on all sides. And,
like a New Age enclave thing-ish, right?
Very much so, yeah. And in fact, there's been a lot of different spiritual teachers throughout the years that have made that a regular stop in their tours of the U.S. Like Krishnamurti was a main spot for him. There's a place called the Ojai Foundation. I think Terence McKenna spoke there a number of times. There's a big Theosophical Society group that's there. So there's a lot of alternative thinkers and esotericism, and so I was raised with my mother and my stepfather were both very much alternative people as far as their lifestyles and their thinking. I grew up, I suppose you could say I grew up in the rabbit hole because nothing about my upbringing or reality was ever normal by other people's standards. So I've always been different in my thinking and my interaction with the world around me. And my mother was a New Age thinker as far as like a yoga teacher. She was an astrologer. She studied astrology from before I was born. And
I am going to be honest, and as a Christian, that's fertile ground. The theosophical, Helen Blavatsky, that's theosophy. Aleister Crowley is what it read to. It was the Rosicrucians. It's anything but Jesus. It's Embrace John Dee, the Chemical Wedding, and it's not what Christians would go for. And I would ask Mike if he's listening, and if we were sitting down, I'd say, are you happy with what's going on in our schools and our medicines now that we look back at the theosophy and realize it was the birthplace of the Planned Parenthood, abortion, racism of eugenics, calling anybody but white human weeds. No, the New Age thing would have worked if it could have all been a European people saying we're moving away. but they did not. Not till late in the game, and their founders were racist. I'm not saying your mother was, Mike, or your stepfather, or you.
Started to grow up, I was, where other kids were learning other things, I was learning about things like astrology and the tarot, and at one point she was a book buyer for New Age bookstores, so she was, as I hit my teens and became more and more interested in life and the world, she was feeding me all kinds of different books that interested me. So, yeah, it was. I was there until my teens. I moved to Hawaii. I lived in the Seattle area for a number of years, and then came to Europe in '97 as an exchange student when I was studying at the University of California. I started as a philosophy major, and then when I went to Italy, when I got there, I studied at the second oldest university in Italy, in Padua, and very incredible experience, and got to see a lot of the old world and travel all over Italy. That's where I met my partner. She and I have been together now for 25 years, and she's a Swede. So after a few years living in Italy, I moved up to Sweden, where I lived for 10 years, and we started a family up there. We have 2 kids, and after a couple of years in Sweden, I was doing a lot of soul searching, and after having done a lot of different professions, I was looking for something where I could use my mind and my hands, and I wasn't going to be in front of a computer all day long, and that ended up through a series of slips and falls and wrenching my back and hurting myself and being helped by chiropractors, I decided I wanted to go in that direction. And so that was another 5 years of study, and then after that, a couple of years of working in Sweden before moving to Spain, where we've been for 10 years now. So bounced around a lot over the last couple decades.
Get around. You do have Mars in 9th house Sagittarius. I mean, with your MC, so it's like you're gonna travel. Come on.
In the Gokelen sector.
So I'm curious, what part of Spain are you in right now?
In the Costa Blanca region, basically like between Valencia and Alicante, on the coast, on the Mediterranean side, about 5 hours south of Barcelona.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a dope country, great people. I'm glad you've found your way, expatriated well. It seems like you haven't been living in a cardboard box. So good job. And I lived in Hawaii in Oahu for a while, so island life, totally get it. But yeah, just looking at your charts, like of course you're going to be traveling a lot with Mars and Sag, 9th house.
Right.
So in any event, just a couple things.
Before we started recording, you asked me about the channel name Stellium.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You've seen my chart there, so
you've got a whole lot in Virgo, in 7th house Virgo.
Yeah, it's actually spread across 2 signs, but 5 planets in the 7th house, and 7 has always been my favorite number. So Stellium7 is how it happened. And also, I don't know if have you ever heard of the sacred symbols of the ancients?
You mean like the Flower of Life and stuff?
No, it's a book that came out by someone named Edith Randall in Florence. Somebody, I can't remember her last name, but it's a system that my father taught me when I was growing up that was a blend of astrology, tarot, and numerology all in one system. It's very fascinating. And,
that sounds exactly like what we like.
Each birthday is associated with a card. And we're talking about the minor arcana, not the major arcana. So my card is the 7 of clubs, and
I'm loving the graphics and everything, and hearing about Mike and stuff. I do want to play the whole video because it's what I'm watching it. I don't want to waste this time. It's set up to record in high definition, so hopefully if I premiere it, then you can, there'll be a chat there and it'll be like it. And I want to do another show that I make clips and prepare for a live and then just can run it off my computer. Synchronicities and everything else, something to look into.
Seven of Clubs. My partner is the Seven of Clubs. My son is the Seven of Clubs. Her mom is the Seven of Clubs. And both of our fathers are the Eight of Clubs. My mom is the King of Clubs, and my daughter is the Ten of Clubs. So it's like when you start to look at the odds of that mathematically, that there's 52 cards in the deck, 50. So anyway,
It is pretty astronomical.
So it's
just a
just,
little aside.
as you mentioned that, and if you combine the three disciplines, let's say, so you said numerology, tarot, and astrology, and the way that one of my favorite researchers, Michael Tessarian, whom you may be aware of, likes to combine.
I've seen a
this
video
with-
or two of his a long time ago, but nothing's fresh in my mind. I've heard the name many times.
Yeah, so anyway, the fourth discipline he adds into this is Kabbalah, whatever then this may mean again.
See?
Aside from that, I can just say, well, thank you for...
Is going to go to Kabbalah, Atlantis, Jesus inside you. But he never walked the earth. That's where it goes. How many times do you have to hear it and you're still looking for something real? It's the Lord Jesus Christ.
Talk about astrology and these other things, because a lot of the work that I've done ties in with the Bible and Christianity and the Book of Enoch in different ways, which I never would have anticipated. So, and I've been interviewed by like SGT Report for the research that I've done, and he's very much a Christian and has
I'm a Christian for the record. I don't,
you are? Okay.
yeah. My grandparents started Tim Keller's church up in Manhattan, Redeemer Presbyterian.
And that is a PCA church that I used to be a member of, the PCA church. And the church in the Manhattan Redeemer Presbyterian Church, so welcoming and inviting to the LGBTQ, so early, accepting, had some trouble in the broom closets and stuff, but still, he's a fraud. Tim Keller is a fraud. I'd love to debate him, but what an interesting twist.
I mean, not that matters. I spent, time in L'Abri, Switzerland, Francis Schaeffer's kind of thing as a helper. Reading everything.
I was one of Francis Schaeffer's at L'Abri's last students when he was suffering from his ending up fatal cancer. They moved L'Abri from Switzerland to Rochester, thus enabling a young philosopher to visit in 1984.
From just all sorts of questions and weird shit I was asking. I'm a Christian. That's the funny. I might not come off that way. I'm sure I've done a lot of picking up. I mean, let's put it this way. Compared to Christians, like, you're a pagan New Ager. Fuck you, you're going to hell. And then New Agers are like, stop mentioning Jesus. So it's like I'm somewhere kind of.
That
But no, okay. So I'm
truth.
That's kind of true. It's kind of like, no, you only took psychedelics because you're a partier. You want to get high, man. Yeah, you don't think you can teach me about the Bible because you got high. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Is that the way it's been? That's the way it's going to be?
Yeah, exactly. The Book of Enoch is crazy. We're going to go down some rabbit holes now, but I know you're that. Because most people aren't. If that's your channel, the subscriber, that's crazy. Because that's my, that's where I'm coming from more. And I think I found some middle ground, whereas Raphael's, he's in Vienna, like a Christian nation, quote unquote, but he's post-Christian. He wasn't raised.
They don't need Enoch, and I'll be happy to show you why you don't need the Book of Enoch for these to be stones crying out, brothers and sisters. Hey, I could go like this. Brothers and sisters, you don't need Enoch. You just need a real religion. Oh, wait, that's... you can get a lot more people like that, but that's not what I want to do. I want a fair and honest debate. about the science, because I brought this to the table, not Roger Spur.
You know, with a text or a, you know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
can't for you, Raphael, but I think he's like post-Christian in that sense. So it's fascinating. I'm like, holy shit, that's what you guys are on? Word.
Well,
And
I'm not
you're
even
ti-
baptized, if that counts. So there you go.
Well, to some people that matters a lot. To me, it doesn't matter at all. But I actually did that in Hawaii as an adult on Easter, ironically, you'd find. Because you've been in Hawaii. I was like, oh yeah. Because the year before, I lost my virginity to a hooker in Hawaii.
Oh my goodness.
It was a horrible, magical, synchronistic event. In any event,
No.
Was it a birthday present, or did you pay?
No, I paid. I was wasted. I was
See,
45,
that
I
is,
was like-
that is absolutely the least laughing matter. Because that is what we war against right now, is the flesh. And so many people can't, you know, every 4 seconds people are wondering, I wonder if someone's thinking about me.
Like, I'm a quarter of a century years old, and I mean, it's complicated. I'm talking too much about myself. Sorry. But basically, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to die a virgin. I didn't think I was going to die, but it's like, and ironically, you're into astrology. I have a Venus aspect going straight through a water, so it's not surprising I, like, became an addict there, lost my virginity there. Excessive, like, life stuff, like, you know, pleasure. In any event, enough about me. Let's talk about you. So you're growing up there. You float over to Europe. I mean, I want to touch on a lot of things. Have you been a Christian the whole time?
I'm not a Christian. That's the thing. Well, my grandmother, who I was extremely close with, she was a Christian throughout my whole upbringing, but she wasn't a Bible thumper, and she wasn't trying to convert me to her faith. She just had a strong belief in God. Always went to church and was a Bible believer her whole life. But she and my mom were oftentimes at odds because of very different world views. My mom, and as did I, was turned off very much by fundamentalism and you know, when you start to dig into Christianity and
In his age group, he would have been turned off by Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker and Jimmy Swaggart, Oral Roberts, and the outright shenanigans of just fleecing the flock for their money. Creflo Dollar.
Catholicism and the world history. As I got into my late teens and read more and more books, I started to realize that, wait a minute, people are like starting wars in Jesus' name. I didn't listen much to what he had to say, did they? You know, so I was kind of turned off by organized religion in general, and I just couldn't for the life of me believe or imagine that the Bible was the work of God. It just seemed like a tool for tyrants and something that, you know, had undergone so many translations and manipulations down throughout history that you'd have to be a fool to like take it as the word of God, and that it was this archaic text. And I had all kinds of ideas about cosmology and Big Bang, and was into quantum physics and philosophy, and I always had really a syncretic approach to living because that's how I was raised. Both of my parents were followers of Indian gurus, different gurus, and owned a health food store in my hometown that also had a little vegetarian restaurant and a New Age bookstore that was all this beautiful little place called Solar Winds, which is no longer there, but it was kind of an epic place back then. And my stepfather was part of a collective of people who were followers of an Indian guru named Swami Muktananda, and they started the health food store, and then they had a little commune and an ashram. So I lived for a year in an ashram when I was like 11 or 12, a really tiny ashram, but it was you know, a group of people who were very devout followers, and they'd get up at dawn and sit in the room chanting with their sitars and you know, the little air organ, and so meanwhile I'm, you know, lying in a sleeping bag on the bed on the floor, listening to this. I still remember some of the chants just because I heard them so many times as I was sleeping. But yeah, so that was an unusual upbringing, and it really led me to kind of back away from anyone who was like fundamental, and fundamentalists in their thinking, and this is the truth, this is the way, this is the one book, you know. And,
No, I totally concur. So
and
what?
now it's all come full circle where I'm like, holy moly, maybe there's something to it all.
Well, that's the mind fuck. Yeah, like there's think heads who would get into aliens and stuff, and I'd start talking about Nephilim and fallen angels and stuff, and they didn't have any cultural context to that. Not that I think aliens have to be demons or fallen angels necessarily, but I'm like, that's a potential book, I guess you could say. What's on your channel that's driving people toward, you know, you were saying half your followers are, you know, I guess you could say Christian or what, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the topic that is drawing them to you?
Well, the research that I've done, really, it's like two different completely areas of research that intertwine, but they're completely separate discoveries. I started with one that was a crazy realization.
And it's going to be all about Roger Spur, because Roger Spur, he did test a rock that nobody else can ever get one tested, but he never did nephorensics. He is crazy, and he's not doing the Lord's work.
Epiphany that a mountain here in this region that I live in could potentially be a titan. It sounds absurd to people who aren't familiar with my work, or you know, have studied geology and believe in the Big Bang and believe that we're, you know, on a 4 billion plus year old spinning planet, and you know, they have a whole set of beliefs, and so something like titans couldn't possibly be true because, well, for one, gravity would cause them to collapse under their weight, and for, you know, the other is that well, we would see traces of them everywhere if that was true. You know, just like we would see, you know, if the trees were these giant avatar-like trees, which a lot of people like to talk about now. So I never gave any of those ideas any thought or credence up until about 4 years ago, when I had a string of experiences that caused me to start questioning every aspect of reality. Because once you've been down enough different rabbit holes of different types and different completely seemingly unrelated subject matter, next thing you know, you start to find that they all kind of intertwine and weave together in a tapestry that is undeniable. And to somebody who hasn't done that work, you come off sounding like a crazed theorist, right? You've got the corkboard behind you with all the push pins and the lines going between them, and the bright red circles, and you know, it's like, this is how they present people who do this in the mainstream media and the movies, as people who can bend and warp reality through a trick of the mind, so that anything can fit into their theory of all that is, no matter how absurd. And they're doing that through mental gymnastics.
That's exactly what it is.
I'm still here with you, and I want you to know that when they go in and do that rock art, I think it's going to tie into that they knew what body parts and where they were doing it at. I really think that the ancients, it's proven they had, you know, so many myths about the stone people, the ancestors, their rocks, and not in a bad way.
It appears that, let's say, the controller side, let's say, is doing exactly that, especially with the current science and so on. Whatever, you know, it's always
well,
like
the term conspiracy theorist, yeah, the term conspiracy theorist was coined and weaponized to do exactly that, to just pigeonhole and put somebody who's willing to question the unquestionables into a box, so that you no longer have to consider what they might say as having any relevance, because clearly they're nuts, you know.
It's an effective tool, like, you know, divided cognitive.
I've rebranded the term. I've said it now in a couple of interviews. I don't use that term anymore. I call them paying attentionists. Because, you know, if you've been around long enough and you've been questioning long enough, then you can see through the BS narratives, and you can start to see not only how things interconnect, but you have a chronological memory of the previous narratives and things that were said before and presented as fact, and that was undeniable, and the science has decided, and we know this, you know, and it's just like our school books where it was just like one long list of all these facts of events that happened at a particular time and things that occurred, and it's just like that's the way it was. That was history, but now it's all about the future, and let's move on to, you know, to space. I was a big time futurist and space junkie and all those things. So yeah, and paying attentionists. This last year, you know, you can see who's paying attention and who isn't.
Well, that's where it gets really tricky. And you said you had heard an episode before with guests Andreas and Victor. There's a lot of people paying attention, and there's people noticing people paying attention, so they throw out what are called psyops or whatever. There's so much confusion these days. I mean, I think it is the end of the age of Pisces. Let's just put it out, right?
Yeah.
First, it's like, holy shit. And it's what's
The
weird.
the
because I don't know that
apocalypse,
there's
you know, the unveiling.
Exactly. I mean, and that's a religiously, you know, it's got a lot of baggage to it, but yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what we believe is happening now that we know Mudflood was Armageddon. These stones are reserved in judgment. You are going to be judged. That's the whole ministry.
Yeah, the lifting of the veil. So it's like you guys can see the the mechanics of hyperdimensional reality. You know, that you are part of at so many levels. Not only are we, you know, like bipedal, fucking opposable thumb, political, sexual creatures, but you know, there's so much more. There's so many levels, and we're aware of that now. And I don't want to presume that people in the past. This is what we tend to do. We tend to think people in the past were stupid, right? Maybe they had a very different experience phenomenologically because of yugas or something. Because you were kind of going through the litany of like, and I'm not against it. Of like, I'm into the Big Bang. I'm into these things as almost a. I mean, you were saying you heard the Rupert Sheldrake one, almost like a material reduction, like a what's it called?
Mechanism.
Yeah, like
Scientism, mechanism.
Yeah. You don't have to prove that stuff.
Anything but empiricism.
Yeah.
You know, I'm of the mind now that, you know, the matrix does exist, but it doesn't exist. We're not in the matrix in a simulation. In my belief, I believe that there is a physical world around us, and that the matrix is an overlay on top of that, and it's a prison for the mind, just, you know, like they say in the movies, you know, and most people are completely unaware that they're in it, and but this is over the last 4 years where I started to go, okay, wait a minute, hold on a second, that's bullshit too, and that's bullshit, and that's bullshit, like, what's real? Where, you know, and it's, you dig into the moon landings, and it's like they're hanging from wires, and they're falling on their face, and there's literally, if you dig into the whole space thing, there are literally thousands and thousands of flaws. And, you know, like you got into with your interview with Andrew Jones, you know, you asked him what he thought, because he's such a master with digital art, and what he thought of NASA and you know, the information they're giving us. And what was it? He had some great line. It was he said, "Oh, you mean the Nazi context art department that our government funds?" And you know, that's, you dig into, it's like, okay, everything's CGI, everything is harnesses and wires and CGI layering glitches. So,
And not just
at some point you have to say, why fake it all? You know, I mean, my first exposure to the rabbit hole, apart from growing up in it, was when my dad gave me a book when I was 19 called Behold a Pale Horse.
I've heard of this. I've heard all Bill Cooper shit. Yeah, he's hard.
Yeah, he spelled out a whole ton of stuff back then. So I was 19, and I was already, you know, he identified as a Christian, and he talked already back then. He was talking about fake alien invasions. That this is what they were. You know, he lays out everything with MK Ultra and all kinds of different documents. Quiet weapons, silent weapons for quiet wars, and protocols of Zion, and all this stuff is in that one book, you know, and he talked about space fakery also, and I just was kind of on board with it, but he was also talking about UFOs and alien tech, and somebody's ringing my doorbell, and I'm not expecting anyone.
Oh, you can totally go get it if you want. I'm good at filling in time. Book of Enoch?
Well, I've heard of it, yes, but I'm not familiar with the content really.
Oh, okay. There's actually a link I should send you, which is crazy, because it's apocryphal. So this gets tricky. But at one point, there was a bunch of books of the Bible, according to Christian tradition, and then this gets into Roman Catholic groups or whatever, Council of Nicaea or whatever, deciding what's in and what's out. This got chopped out.
Yeah, everything that's not canon basically is particularly.
Yes, this is out of canon. Yeah, that's what this is. So the Book of Enoch is almost like the Star Wars of heaven. It's like the story of how fallen angels gave information to people before the appointed time and all sorts of crazy stuff. It's heady. It's like, and I've seen a particular YouTube clip about it using animes or video game clip scenes or something like that, and it was very compelling. It might not be for everybody, but people that are listening to this channel, they're into Christianity. The Book of Enoch is worth checking out. It's pretty hardcore. It's almost like an RPG Final Fantasy type situation for Christianity. It's like the origins of how did what was the war in heaven? I think that's the idea. So it's interesting he's into that. I was tripping out though. I heard Spanish. I'm like, is he in Costa Rica? And I'm like, oh yeah, he's in Spain. Duh. Yes, I'm so used to that kind of thing. I was trying to familiarize Raphael a little with the just I don't know.
Okay. I just wanted to finish the thing I was talking about with regards to NASA. So I already got wind to NASA fakery back when I was in my teens, but it never occurred to me because of all the space programming in the form of Star Trek and Star Wars and all the sci-fi stuff that I grew up loving, that they'd been faking it ever since. And so that was kind of a rude awakening when someone challenged me on some of my beliefs and I started to go and try and prove things that I thought were really easy to prove, and it turned out to not be so easy to prove. And that also got me questioning just the nature of reality in general.
Yeah, so I'd like to bring this up once again on that note. I referenced it last show that Eddie Lynn recently, I guess, reposted this concept that Werner von Braun actually wrote a book in 1952 called Mars, A Technical Tale, where it really says that the leader of Mars is called Elon. What a scripted reality is this? This is incredible,
But that's where it gets weird.
Yeah.
Because have you ever seen Aha's Take On Me music video? That's like fourth wall breakage, I think.
You're talking about Take On Me? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they're Aha, the band is Aha. Yeah, Take On Me, where there's like black and white cartoon just smashed through. That's kind of like some fourth wall, multi-dimensional breakthroughs.
It's like Portal, Stargate, all that stuff.
Exactly.
They've given us tons of that in Hollywood when you look at the movies, but that's also, I think, metaphor for, well, you've got what is it, looking glass technology in CERN, and who knows what that's doing, but also psychedelics very much take you to other realms, and the people who try and kind of minimalize the importance of psychedelics, they tend to talk about it as just an epiphenomenon, just like consciousness. It's an accident of a complex mechanistic system, and
which it is at a level. We'll give them some credence. I'm not denying that.
Well, clearly the molecules are altering brain function and the physiology in the body in ways that are leading to heightened perceptions and experiences that are way beyond anything you would normally have in everyday existence, unless you're a yogi who's been meditating for decades and can control your breath and all these things. But so it's there's something in there, out there, both, and what it is that for all of us to figure out.
The Tao that cannot be named, just right?
Just for clarity's sake, did we already
The
get
Tao that can be named is not that Tao.
Did we already get to the two connecting points you mentioned in terms of your Christian audience, what Jim kind of was referring to?
Oh yeah, back to that.
Points, right?
Yeah, so thank you. So the Christianity thing, I just kind of brushed that aside. Actually, as a kid, I explored the church a little bit, because there was a church and they used to sing, and I went in. I was like 10 or 12 years old, and I went in and memorized the 10 Commandments, and they gave me a Bible, and we went around this bus called the Joy Bus, and they sang Christian songs, and I did that for maybe 10 or 12 times, and my mom was okay with it. She's like, if you want to do that, you go right ahead, and she didn't try and stop me from that at all. But after a while, I got bored with it, and I don't know, it just never really resonated with me to the point where I wanted to read the Bible and study and go to church. But my grandmother was very much a Bible believer, and so it's always been there, and then when you study history, like I alluded to before, you start to find out that most of the real tragedies in the world are centered around beliefs about spirituality and God, and how it's all been harnessed for by evildoers for exploitation. So I just steered away from it.
And then, not trying to catch you off guard, but since I'm the unbaptized one, already mentioned the Kabbalah, I'll just go one step further right now, if I may, just to get your insight, or if you heard about this. So I recently did a talk with David Ewing Jr. on, let's say, Tartarian, Mudflood, and also in particular, I was surprised myself, about the Quran. And the idea that actually the Quran may be one of the few unmodified books, because when whatever colonial imperialist force was rewriting history, he may have noticed this collectively, in a sense, started memorizing it. This only refers to the original, let's say, Arabic Quran. It's only a specific book, of course, because also here there was a lot of divide and conquer, and then there's the whole story with the Jesuits actually founding Islam, which in this frame of reference may just be another, let's say, co-opting division psyop. Anyways, I was just wondering if you had ever heard of that, because this was one of the last places where I would have looked, which deliberately says, look, people are falsifying history, people are selling Bibles for money, there's buried buildings, look who lived here before, like really stuff that would make you question the fundamentals of our, scripted reality, which of course inherently then, in a sense, is dangerous to any force that wishes to control.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a book I read a long time ago called The Chalice and the Blade by Rian Eisler, and she was talking about also the Gnostic Gospels as well by the name Pagels. These are books where they talk a lot about how, at the Council of Nicaea, different books were added to and taken out of the Bible, and
I was literally talking about
different
that.
revisions.
Yeah, if you look at your door, I was telling you about the Council of Nicaea and the Enoch book.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you
So that was another reason I never really gave the Bible much credence. But I do now. I just want to say that I still haven't read it, but I suspect that there's a lot of tremendous amount of truth in there. Another thing that you reminded me of was the works. When you were talking about was it the Torah you mentioned?
Well, Quran or Kabbalah, I mean.
Well, the Quran,
knows,
okay.
But
Yeah.
Quran
So Torah versus Quran. So the Quran. I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Jan Irvin from used to be Gnostic Media, and now he goes by Logos Media.
I'm sure I've seen something of him, but
he's done some very interesting work on this subject. Where whenever people want to talk badly about Islam or the Quran, there's a whole bunch of different phrases that reappear all over the internet of quotes from this text, and he started because he's constantly doing research and going in to the primary sources for different information. He's looked a lot into psychedelics over the years. He's written books. He published John Allegro's book, The Sacred Mushroom, and he's interviewed everyone there was to interview within psychedelia, and he's had a lot of very interesting different directions that he's taken with his research, looking into secret societies and intelligence agencies and how that ties into the psychedelic community and to Silicon Valley and to the cutting edge of all of that, which is like the trance dance, Burning Man boom kind of festivals, which all weaves together in a tapestry of coincidences that are far too coincidental to be coincidence.
Just very briefly, because I have nowhere else to mention this, I've been to Boom Festival in 2018, and there a random individual, and I totally cannot verify this, somehow told me, yeah, this place got sold to Scientology or something like that, I mean, I had a great experience. Yeah?
The land
Boom.
got sold?
Maybe the land or something about it, and I was just like, this sounds really strange to me. And I mean, This is like the synchronicities are just stacking up here, because I was listening to this interview with Android Jones, and he talked about Boom as well. Did you meet him there? No, I didn't know. And I mean,
Because
yeah.
he was there and he premiered Samsara, which is this incredible video that he did.
Yeah. It's
And
crazy.
and then he also did like a fireside chat or a round table, and so he was one of the speakers at Boom, and I was also there.
Oh, nice. In 2018.
So, yes.
Nice.
And
Well,
it's the only one of those things I've ever been to. I've never been to Burning Man,
You've
and
been to
I didn't even know about Burning Man back when I was there. And I wanted to, once I found out about something like that, I was like, God, that sounds incredible, and I wanted to try it out. And I heard that Boom was the closest you could get to going to Burning Man. And there was an author named James Orrock who had written a book called Trip to Moon Palace that a friend of mine introduced me to. And when I read that one, it kind of sparked a psychedelic renaissance for me, because I did a lot between my teens and 20s, and then I didn't do anything for like 10, 15 years, started a family, went to chiropractic college, and was living in a country where I didn't know anybody who was into any of that, and I wasn't going looking for it myself. So I had about a 15-year break from that, and then this friend talking about this book and me reading it just kind of sparked a renewed interest, and then I started listening to Lorenzo Haggerty's Psychedelic Salon and listening to loads of stuff from Terence McKenna, who I'd never run across until
He's a trip, right?
about 6-7 years ago. And I was listening to, yeah, he's definitely a trip. And listening to, I think the Psychedelic Salon podcast is up to like 600 or 700 podcasts, and 150 or 200 of those are probably to Terence McKenna. And that's where I heard the trialogues and a number of other things. So it was something that I was very much interested in, the archaic revival, and I felt like the world is just kind of heading down this dead-end direction. If something doesn't turn around, well, what's that something going to be? And I thought that psychedelics were going to play a huge role in that, and there was a lot of good research coming out of places like Johns Hopkins and other reputable schools. And then you got Strassman with the DMT, the spirit molecule stuff. That was like the first time the U.S. government had allowed research to be done on psychedelics, and he's doing it on DMT, and it's starting to become popularized. And Joe Rogan is there pumping, every episode talking about DMT and mushrooms and psychedelics in different ways. And that was before I awakened to how much of that whole community is intelligence and letter agencies and pushing agendas and actually, promoting pharmakeia, which the Bible specifically warns against,
Ironically, in the book of Enoch, it's saying fallen angels gave us these kind of psychedelics potentially, because it gets it quickly into
Right.
presuppositions very quickly. If you're of the mind of a kind of a Darwinian model, the McKinnon model looks great, right? Or 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Absolutely, and then you've got
makes sense.
you've got stoned ape theory. You've got an incredibly plausible theory for how evolution really took place, even though Darwinian evolution to me is a crock of bull. That there are way too many missing links, and too many giant skeletons have been converted into dinosaurs. For my taste, that's my theory. It's like they go missing whenever they're found, thanks to the Smithsonian, and then all the top archaeological digs and sites are controlled by UNESCO and other agencies. So there's a tight grip there. And when you look at academia, and you see you've got the Royal Society and the Royal Society, and it's a nice old boys club there that decide what reality is for everybody.
Indeed, and if it is true, then Ephesus was empty about 150 years ago, and now it's like the site for ancient discovery. So
What was empty?
Ephesus in Turkey, which is one of the main sites they use for like Greek or whatever ancient artifacts and so on. There's always exhibitions.
The Book of
in Vienna
Ephesians
and so
is
on.
based off of Ephesus.
And all I can say
Well,
is
I'm
that
familiar with Çatal Hayuk and what's the other, Göbekli Tepe. Those are both in Turkey as well. Çatal Hayuk was already being talked about back by Rianne Eisler in the book I mentioned before, The Chalice of Blade. And she's talking about these dichotomies between the hunter gatherer society, like the egalitarian people are cooperating and working with each other, versus the societies that are ruled by the blade, which are the conqueror societies, and that one of the things that they were noticing when they were looking at the really ancient structures, and they're talking about 12,000 years ago or so, was that there were no weapons, there were no walls around the cities. That came later. So the assumption then is that they were peaceful. And, she thinks that that's because they were more matriarchal. So those are different theories about it. But Chatel Hayuk also, or Göbekli Tepe, ties into the works of Graham Hancock, which was another deep rabbit hole for me.
Joe Rogan podcast. Him with Graham Hancock and
those are epic, and Randall Carlson.
Yes.
Yeah, and I read several books by Hancock, and one of the first ones I read was Supernatural, and that came around the same time I got this other book. What's that?
I think, is that one of his newer books?
No, Supernatural's older. I would guess it's 10 plus years old.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of his newest. I haven't read it, but the second to last book he wrote was called Magicians of the Gods, which was a follow-up to his Fingerprints of the Gods. And he, like in Supernatural, he lays out this. He talks about McKenna. He talks about these different theories about the old cave paintings that they're finding around Europe that are supposedly 35,000 years old, and that they've tried to understand what the markings are on these caves, because all over the place they've got the same symbols that are reappearing, and that ties into a neurological phenomenon of actual visual effects that people get when they're on different stages of psychedelics. So the idea being that humankind has evolved through our relationship to the entheogens and the psychedelic drugs, and that ties into Stamets' idea. McKenna he's laying out that, and you've got the whole panspermia thing where the idea is that the spores of mushrooms can percolate out through the atmosphere and into space, and then over hundreds of millions of years work their way to other planets and seed new locations with life. And this is so fascinating because Paul Stamets talks about the mycelial network can actually come from the ocean and creep up onto the land. So the time when it's only volcanoes and there's no plant or vegetable life, the mycelium can take root on land and actually not decompose, but actually leach out the minerals that are in the different rock, the fundamental rock before there was any life, and then create the fruiting bodies of the mushrooms, which then decompose, and all of a sudden then you have your topsoil. So there's your opening to plant life. So they're all very interesting theories, but I no longer subscribe to certain aspects of that because I don't believe in the whole comet-striped younger dryas narrative that Carlson and Hancock are promoting, because I think space is fake, or not fake, but it's not what they're telling us. I think space is real, but it's not Hollywood space. It's something entirely different.
So the idea of panspermia is pretty popular in science fiction. What's also interesting, I'd like to, I'm not sure if we can unravel it in one session, but again, these strange connections between psychedelics, cultural engineering, festivals, and letter agencies. However, even here in the most recent Star Trek, it's called Discovery, and there they actually have a spore drive, and their main scientific officer, who's then the pilot for that drive, which is working through tardigrade DNA, where I also heard that's kind of a, but that storyline may even be a rip-off of a certain Steam game or something published 2 years prior or whatever. Strange story.
Right.
But anyways, this guy in the series is called Stamets himself. So it's interesting here how they are still intertwining this, make it seem nice in parallel realities, and I think it's
it is a cosmology that they're presenting, and with that cosmology goes a spiritual view on life and essentially a new religion. It is the religion of heliocentrism, ultimately, because when you take people like Bruce Damer, who claims to have worked for NASA and been at the Pentagon, and he's this really far out character. He, to me, kind of typifies and embodies the whole Burning Man movement of these super geniuses who use psychedelics, and they're crossing multiple different fields in life and bringing new knowledge to us. And I take a step back away from all of that when we realize that, well, NASA's full of bull. Why are they full of bull? What would the point of fakery be? I can understand it during the Cold War when we want to present the illusion that we beat the Russians there, right? And that the Russians, okay, well, they got there first, you know. But why wouldn't the Russians have exposed the fakery? Clearly, they would have known it was fake. So then all of a sudden, now you have to step back even further and you realize that all the spacefaring agencies are also giving us the same BS narrative. So that suggests that there's a collusion among countries that are supposedly not at war, but at war ideologically and have completely different governments and governmental structures, and yet they're all towing the line on things like space and missions to Mars and, you know, controlling robots from hundreds of millions of miles away, and etc. So I've gotten suspicious of all of that. Going back to what you were talking about as far as letter agencies, Jan Irvin and Steve Outram did a series called The Shadow History of the Burners, which is an 8-part series, like 3 hours each. There's a lot of material to cover, and they start just connecting all the dots of all the key players, you know, going back to the beginnings of Silicon Valley and the beginnings of rocketry and all of that stuff, and working their way forward into the cutting edge of it all, which is the whole Burning Man and trance dance psychedelic movement. But when you go back to the beginnings of it, you know, to the 1940s, you've got the appearance of mushrooms in the mind of the American people on the front page of Life magazine with Gordon Wasson and you know, the magic mushrooms and all this stuff. And it's like, you dig into it, you find out even the guy who was the supposed amateur mycologist who went down to South America and discovered the great magic mushroom and met with Maria Sabina, you know, it's like this folklore within the psychedelic community, and everyone's always parroting the same stories, right? But when you dig into it, you find out that Gordon Wasson was the head of propaganda for J.P. Morgan, so he's a very high level, you know, in the banking. He, you know, there's, according to Jan Irvin, there's actually pay requisitions for the CIA, so he's on the payroll with the CIA. It's like, okay, so the initial appearance of psychedelics in the mind of the American public was already tainted with intelligence back at its very beginning. And then when you go forward, you find out, like, people like Timothy Leary, he was also, you know, intelligence, and also he was a devout follower of Crowley and the acid tests and all those. It's a deep set of rabbit holes that just branch off in every direction from that point. So I'm suspicious when it comes to why is there such an agenda to push psychedelics on people, because it's always presented in this real, this is the way forward for healing, for you to overcome whatever it is that's holding you back in life and to heal your past traumas, and that was why I was very much interested in the archaic revival and even wanted to write a book on the subject and weave in some of my own experiences, and it would take hours to really go into, you know, the events that led up to me taking a step back and going, wait a minute, you know, it had to do with an experience I had that tied into Pinocchio and Disney, and that led into MK Ultra and Masonry and strange scenes in the canyon, you know, like McGowan's work, and there's just way too much there for that to be the weaving together of somebody who's just playing connect the dots, and there's no truth to any of it.
So I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
No, just it's certainly all connected. And it's definitely great to always, you know, as you mentioned, go to original sources, check the original history, identify all the key players, and check, simply put, whether they're on the letter agency payroll, which, you know, so many people are everywhere, and oftentimes it's not known whilst they are very much public, even though recently there has been this Academy to the Stars. Dark Journalist always goes on about it with Tom DeLonge, former Blink 182 or whatever. and they raised
Before
like
these
a tremendous amount of
videos.
money. They raised a tremendous amount of money, and then they had like
Really?
this board. Yeah, they had. Now they're 50 million in debt. They wanted to produce all kinds of stuff.
Really?
Yeah, they had this board, and even on the board you had people like, I think by the name of Alessandro and others, which are known CIA agents, you know. So it's like,
Right.
it's not even hidden anymore. And what I just like to differentiate, ideally, at least in one's own mind, is then not allow just like a, let's say a pentagram or anything, a cross or anything, be tainted by, for lack of a better term, the controller faction, just because of course they try to put their mark on everything and anything. At the same time,
Well, symbols are tools.
Totally.
They're
and-
ways of conveying information. They're neutral. That's the way I see them anyway.
Exactly.
As our tools. you can use carpentry tools to bludgeon somebody or to build a house.
Exactly, and same with psychedelics. So my question now would kind of be, at least in my view, why then, in a sense, let the cat out of the bag? Aside from the fact that we know much too little about accurate history before anything, you know, that's more than 50 years ago or whatever, or even less than that. But why let the cat out of the bag? Then kind of let Reagan come in, ban everything again, make a big war on drugs, still sell it.
Well,
underhand.
anytime you may prohibit something, you're going to immediately draw all of the youth to it, which is exactly what they wanted to do. The whole psychedelic buses and the Ken Kesey thing. No, I said buses, but it was, you know, the electric Kool-Aid acid test. I read that book when I was in my teens, early 20s, and it was one of those classics that you read, you know, along with the beatnik literature and Alan Watts, and, you know, there's the whole set of books that were all tied into this time period and these kinds
Like
of
an Ojai initiation, I imagine.
and yeah, you know, that was what I was growing up with. But Jan Irvin exposed, I think he called it an MK Ultra reunion, and he had actual video footage where there was a bunch of guys who were known agents, and they were sitting around a room and they were literally discussing the buses, plural, and there were a lot of these buses that were going around, and the you know, the letter agency was behind the vast majority of the distribution of LSD, you know, through that time period. So they wanted people taking this stuff. There's no doubt about it. And then you had the Grateful Dead, which is very unusual stuff. And Jan Irvin did another series called Laying the Dead to Rest, which I can recommend, that talks about their connections to the occult and to the secret societies. And they were a primary source of distribution for all that for decades, because they were going around from town to town to town. So that's kind of concerning. Jan Irvin talks about, you know, the evolution of the term psychedelic. Before that, it was psychomimetic. It was a telepathine, was something that Terence McKenna talks about it being called, you know, because it allowed people to actually communicate telepathically. Psychomimetic, mimicking psychosis. There were lots of different terms, and so then, you know, they've rebranded it psychedelic, being mind manifesting. So that sounds kind of cool, you know. And then entheogen, you know, generating the God within. So that's appealing for the people who are on the spiritual quest. Jan Irvin calls them suggestogens because they make you incredibly suggestible when you're
That
under
is
influence,
true.
which
It's
makes it very easy for someone who knows the psyche and how it works to program somebody who's in that state. And when you look into MK Ultra and how they go about doing all of their stuff, you're talking about literally fracturing and fragmenting the psyche of the individuals through traumatic experiences. And we've all undergone this in varying degrees. I mean, if you think about Disney films, they're filled with trauma-based mind control programming, where you've got the battle of good and evil, and you've got these demonic elements in literally every movie ever done. And you know, that it's like, okay, those are great stories, and it's the hero's journey, and it's all these things, like, you know, Joseph Campbell would frame it in this really positive way. But is that, you know, is a 3-year-old or a 4 or 5 or a 6 or 7-year-old psychologically equipped to handle those kinds of traumas? Like, I remember very clearly when Bambi's mother died. You know, that's like in the first 10 minutes of the film. You've got all this idyllic setting, and Bambi's playing with Thumper in the meadow, and the birds are there, the bluebirds, and then boom, Bambi's mom dead by fire. You know, it's like, okay, well, whatever comes after that is going to be coming into the person who's already in a disassociated state, and that's a very concerning thing. So, you know, that, yeah, I don't know, we have threads going everywhere now. I want to get back to the Torah thing real quick, because that also ties into to the work that Jan Mervin has done, where he went and he started looking at the primaries on all of these different quotes that are used to damn, you know, the Torah, because it makes your religion look horrible in the eyes of a Westerner. And when he started to look into those one by one and go through and check the primaries, none of them were there. Like I think he said like 6% of the different quotes that were bouncing all over had any basis in fact. Now I haven't checked his work, so I don't know if he's telling the truth, but he's done a lot of very interesting research, and you know, I think it's worth looking into. And then he got the idea to check the Kabbalah, or what's the other text? Is it the Kabbalah? The Torah, the Kabbalah.
The Talmud maybe?
The Talmud, that was what it was. And so all of these quotes that were being, or not all, but many of the quotes that were being attributed to the Torah were actually, had been taken verbatim from the Talmud.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking now, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that is like, okay, so, you know, is this some kind of black magic that's being worked, or what's happening there? Anyway, there's a lot of different things to look into there that we've already talked about.
Right, as the big Oscar would say, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. I'm kind of curious about your kind of ontological presuppositions at this point. I mean, you were saying that at one point you were very okay with certain things, like a younger dryas kind of Graham Hancock approach or whatever. And now that you're not talking about, you're saying space isn't so much. So you don't have to be like, this is the truth. I just want to know, like maybe in certain elements, like where your head is at in terms of modeling. And with the understanding that that's not always been the case, it may not always remain. So you don't have to feel pigeonholed. Like if you're a flat earther now and you won't be, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't care. I'm just curious. Like how are you viewing reality? Because sometimes I'm like, you know, Raphael's very, he's turned me on to more New Age monism, if you want to put it that way. Whereas like in psychedelic experiences, you know, minus any possible MK Ultra programming via cultural icons like McKenna and stuff. But personal, you know, experiences have led me to see the holographic fractality of reality. I mean, you were talking about fractals. One of my first mushroom trips in high school, actually, I lost my mind and totally. I mean, it was kind of like an initiation, but like I wasn't ready, kind of thing. I had no healthy thing. But I did a bunch of mushrooms and was like, oh shit, I see the fractal nature of reality. I wasn't really tripping face like visually. I just had the gnosis, right? Like, oh yes, the Milky Way is your blood, is the same in the beach, whatever.
Right. As above, so below, as within, so without.
It's hard to, you know, that's an ineffable quality of reality, but when you see it, even if only for a moment through the lens of a hallucinogen or whatever, it kind of leaves a mark on you. It irks me. Anyway, my point is, my worldview has changed, but you know, sometimes I'm more optimistic, sometimes I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Where are you at now? I mean, it's been an interesting couple of years. I mean, astrologically, even speaking with the conjunctions and such, we're about to, we just entered Gemini season, eclipse season is about to start with very soon.
I'm 53, and I can tell you that my beliefs about the nature of reality on just about every level in the last 5 years have just undergone complete changes. Not just as a result of the research that I've done and the things that I presented, but you know, looking into cosmology, looking into the nature of our realm, our world, finding that there were inconsistencies, many, in the model that I grew up just taking for granted, because there's no way so many people could be in on it, and there's no way that they could have kept a secret for so long. All these things that we think that are actually logical fallacies. You know, it's appeal to authority, appeal to groupthink. You know, there's all and we just, through our hubris and our own personal ego, we come to the conclusion that we couldn't possibly be wrong about those things, because that would mean the vast majority of everybody is wrong about everything, and that couldn't possibly be true because there's all those brilliant scientists out there that are looking through their telescopes and floating around in on the ISS, with their live stream, and so when it's interesting because I talked about all this kind of awakening to wait a minute, when it comes to psychedelics and how they're pushed, why the push? What's the agenda? Why do they want people taking these things? Is it for the betterment of society and humanity? Well, if that's the case, then why? If you look into the electric Kool-Aid acid test, it was like the perfect scenario for a psychotic break. You get people who've never taken psychedelics, you give them 400 micrograms, which is like 4 hits of acid. You put them in a very public place with a lot of people, and with a band that's playing music that has 2 sets of drummers, and Jerry Garcia in one video I saw of him described it as the Ouroboros, where they get these circulating rhythms that were going around in a circle around the room in opposite directions, and then like this cacophonic music and things happening with strobe and everything. Well, maybe to an experienced psychonaut, but not to somebody who's never even smoking weed, and they think they're going to go try this, and it's like, are you experienced? And you got so, and then when you dig into stuff like what's his name? The Doors, Jim Morrison, the weird scenes in the camera, McGowan, Admiral Byrd. There's all these tie-ins to intelligence agencies in the music industry as well, which is just
Sure. So hold on, just take a deep
Mark
breath.
Devlin goes into that deep. Yeah.
I'm curious, because Virgos tend to do this. I have a friend, Corey Kaplan, who's been on a bunch of these Virgo. I'm looking at your chart. I mean, you've got Mercury in 8th fucking house, so it's like, you're very intense. It's opposite your Saturn in Aries 2nd house, so you're questioning the world seriously, quite frankly. And Pluto and Uranus are conjunct your Sun. So you're here to like flip up the tables Jesus style, straight up, even if you don't believe in God. So, but I'm kind of curious. Okay, so this is where it gets funny to me because, and this isn't like to be naive or blasé or anything. No, whatever. I'm kind of like when we pull out passive point, because Virgos tend to get very scrutinized very quickly, and not paranoid in a bad way, but very mechanical and like segmented in their thinking. Where there's like, and I'm not even saying this bad. I appreciate it. Like I said, the girl I'm with is a Virgo. I'm not hating on Virgos. Point is, I'm kind of curious when you pull back. It's like, what's not programming? Like, there's no neutral place. This is what I've kind of always talked about with Raphael. It's like, all right, so it's like, I mean, this is where it gets weird. Where the negative polarity of what you're explaining might be like, these are government agencies trying to co-opt the psyches of citizens, right? Like that's like definitely what you're painting it as, which may or may not be actually.
And specifically lead them to experiences where they might actually encounter entities, and as Andrew Jones alluded to in his interview, he was talking about demonic possession. He was talking about.
It was more Zoroastrian than I was expecting. I was like, oh really?
Well, I was really, I really enjoyed that interview because he touched on so many different things that I've been thinking about and have, uncovered on my own in my own research. But he's like one of the only people that's well known in the psychedelic community, apart from Young Irvin, who's been extremely ostracized by the whole community because he's calling out a bunch of people for their unnatural connections to certain unnatural things. And so Jones was like the first time I'd heard people talking about this. Now it's interesting because if you go into Hancock's work, he goes from supernatural and he paints a really beautiful, wonderful image of psychedelics in that book. But then he went on to write 2 books of fiction called War God 1 and 2, which I only read the first parts of, and they were extremely dark. And it was all about the mushroom cults in South America, and the Aztecs that were like dosing the shit out of people with really high dose mushrooms to put them in a completely terrified state so that they could march them up to the top of the ziggurats or the pyramids, and then extract their still beating hearts from their chests while they're incredibly high. I mean, this is pure demonic activity at the darkest, most powerful level. And Hancock's talking about like as many as 50, 70,000 people in the course of a week being sacrificed live. I mean, this is some dark shit. And when you hear about psychedelics and going down to the rainforest to have your experience with a shaman, it's always presented in this airy-fairy sort of a thing where it's like you're gonna have to do some work. You know, it's not going to be easy. It's not necessarily going to be fun. You might puke your guts out, but it's only going to be good for you because you're going to, yeah, well maybe you're going to get, you know, demonically possessed or raped by some interdimensional entity. You know, it's like, oh, but that's all. This is getting back to what I want to say before with Tim Leary and these other guys and Be Here Now and all this. It's all about the ego death and reaching that point where you have the breakthrough experience, so your ego dies, so that then you can be reborn and you've grown through this experience. And while that may happen to some, that ego death might actually be a fracturing of the psyche and an opening up of the spiritual body that could potentially allow a person to become demonically possessed, or, you know, but they're constantly talking about it in this perspective of, oh, well, those are all just reflections of other aspects of your deeper self, right? And so you're battling your own demons and you're coming to terms with it. And I understand the truth of that because I've had some very profoundly, you know, intense psychedelic experiences. But I never gave any credence to the idea that, well, first of all, I'll just say I've never had entity experiences. I've had the sense that there was another there, but not necessarily in me. But I've never had interactions with entities in any of those experiences.
It'll fuck you up.
Many people I know have, but I've had, you know, very high, like I did, are you familiar with Santo Daime? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, Santo Daime Church, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a syncretic religion that was founded in South America by a guy who was, I think, a rubber tapper, who had just a profound psychedelic experience on ayahuasca after a shaman gave him, and he started a whole religion, which is now, along with Unayo de Vegetal, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, they're like the two kind of mainstream accepted ayahuasca churches. And so I had
They're the
10
acid tests of
different.
ayahuasca now, there, I guess.
What's that?
I said they're the semi-acid tests of ayahuasca down there now, I guess.
Right. Well, not just down there, all over. They're all over the world now, and they're in Holland. I don't know about Austria, but they're in Spain. They're in all over South America. You've got states like Oregon that have completely legalized, entheogenic use, and it's all within this ceremonial context. Well, my experiences from my 20s with psychedelics was always just, I mean, some of it, a lot of it was recreational also, but I went in from the beginning with the spiritual mindset after having already read a ton of books on the subject, and was very cautious. I never did anything until I was 19. I didn't even smoke pot until I was 19 because my mom was a meditator, and she was like, you can get there on the natch, you know, as Terence McKenna used to say, you know, through meditation, and then you don't risk, you know, psychotic breaks or you know, getting addicted to substances, and you can only reach these higher, you know, levels of experience through the drug rather than ever figuring out how to get there on your own. And so I don't know, I lost where I was going with that, but
maybe allow me just to say, you mentioned about, well, demonic possession. Of course, that's a, let's say, topic and perspective unto itself. Also, the entire question, is reality really holographic? Are these aspects of yourself? The concept that I tend to agree with is like vibration to like vibration. What you put out is what you get back. So it very much, of course, depends. You know, they then like to say set and setting, but also very much, of course, let's say the ideology, who you're with there, the shaman. And I was in a, I don't know if you call it facetious way or whatever, I was almost about to say, well, you don't, unfortunately, even need any interdimensional entities to come around and rape you. You may as well have, and I heard this too often, although I also have had, you know, many great experiences, but simply with, I'm about to say, retarded shamans or whatever, or you know, people that just put themselves in a position and then act in a way where you're like, you've understood nothing, obviously. And those, of course, are not the people you would want to learn from or do any ceremony with, or who give you some other, or even, you know, they tell you we do one ceremony and then they give you some acid on top you don't even know. All kinds of
Yeah,
You
and,
know?
and
That exists for
you know,
sure.
they have the idea that they're experts because they've gotten high a bunch of times, and they present themselves as such. And yeah, I mean, you compare that to somebody who's like trained to be a shaman in the rainforest and has done 10,000 trips, and they're like, you know, they've spent as much time navigating those realms as they have in the physical concrete world, and so when I started to get wind to the idea that not everything was, you know, shits and giggles and airy fairy when it came to the psychedelic push, because I mean, you got, like I said, Johns Hopkins is coming out with stuff, and they're, mushrooms are great for depression, and DMT is great for but yeah, there's a whole lot of pro CV research coming out of there as well, and when you look into who are some of the big names behind all of that, it's like, doubling back on letter agencies once again, it would seem. So there's a whole lot of propaganda out there to be decoded and sorted out. I stepped away from it all 5 years ago, and I haven't gone back because I still haven't come to any kind of terms for myself about what, you know, I don't know. After that, and after I had these experiences with Santo Daime, I went to 10 different ceremonies, and that I could write a book about those experiences, and this
You
particular
probably
segment
should.
of time.
Given your North and second house areas. Like, you should document your adventure.
I've already got a book title, and I've got one book that's like 95% done, and it's with an editor that's from a previous chapter of life, which we'll go into on another visit. And once that one's done, then that'll free me up creatively to write books that I really want to write, which are, though really, this other one has just been like giving birth, you know, it's been such a long, arduous process, that these others I think will write themselves, because they're based on a lot of personal experience and stories that I want to tell, so I think it'll go a lot quicker. But right around the time I was having those Santo Daime experiences, I was also studying all this stuff, Graham Hancock stuff, and then started to get into or become more aware of the connection to letter agencies, and that was when my friend Alex started hitting me with challenges to my cosmological model as well, and he has a very interesting channel called Conspiracy Music Guru, and he's affectionately known as the Flat Earth Man.
He's got this thing done.
What's that?
So yeah, I'm just like, I've never heard of him. I'll have to check it out, because I'm open-minded, but like just kind of.
You've never heard of him?
Oh my God.
God.
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
But I'm also not the guy to ask. I mean, you know, I don't know what SGTV is or whatever, and Raphael were saying like it's a big deal. I'm like, that's cool. But
Yeah.
I'm not the guy. It's weird. I know a lot about weird things, but not about the things I should know about it. I just got my first fucking credit card recently. I'm a man child. Like, don't ask me. I'm not an expert. I'm a Gemini.
You're just a late bloomer. So was I.
Well, Gemini. So,
I'm just getting going just now. I hope I can finish on my project. Yeah.
No, when you drop that book, we'll have you on to talk about that. I mean, I was like, you're a very coach of mine. I'd like to see you kind of cross-pollinate with certain people. Even Rodrigo, like hearing you guys talk together would be fun. But
They did, not just once. They had huge shows.
Yeah,
4 hours.
We got about
4
7
hours
hours
of
of
video
talk.
picture documentation, for sure.
It was like 3 weeks ago or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Around there.
I forgot how much spare time plays me listening to podcasts. When I was growing weed, I would turn on the
2x.
Yeah. Because
You know how I started because Terrence McKenna is so hypnotic, but he's also really slow, and a lot of times he repeats himself. And so I was listening to a lot of McKenna there and hiking for a long time, and that's when I started going up to 1.5, and it stressed me out in the beginning. It's like, oh my God, it's too fast, and I'd forget to breathe, and then after a while I just got used to it, and then I could go up to 1.75. If someone's a slow talker, I can do 2x, no problem. Get through a lot more information that way.
It's called machine elf mode. Like it's
Yeah.
doable. That's actually a really good way. That's okay. That's a good example. This is a weird way. Weird segue. But what you just said is a good example of a life hack to cause your cognition to enhance some way. Now, your spirit mind body connection, that's a whole other thing. But I'm wondering, so your negative polarity view of these lettered agencies, of these things kind of fracture the psyche that people and program them possibly for Luciferian agendas, who knows? That's one. I'm not saying that's not even happening. It's both and. It's not either or. I'm like, that is a level of it. But at the same time, one has to think these are also almost 2001 black obelisk or monolith or whatever, right? The monolith, like certain apes touch this thing and then they rock it to the next level. That's the whole mechanics of the thing, in a way. Which is also simultaneously happening, I feel. I mean, it seems like you have a very negative opinion on psychedelics, which I don't care. If you do,
I don't actually. It might sound like that. Some of the most profound learnings and incredible experiences I've ever had were under the influence of psychedelics.
You're just I guess.
But I was led to believe certain things about it by key players in the psychedelic industry that on more reflection and on more study are propaganda. They are narratives that are being pushed. And so then the question is, why are they pushing the narrative? And why are they misrepresenting something? And why are they not showing the risks for what they really are? And why are they, it's all positive. It's all good. And if you have a problem, this is, like the electric Kool-Aid acid test, it was a,
If you fail, you're close-minded.
yeah, if you failed, it's like you were
cool.
open-minded, and you're not cool enough. You couldn't handle it. You just couldn't handle it. That's the problem, And yeah, well, maybe the reason they couldn't handle it was because you put them in a scenario that was just ripe for fracturing their brain in ways that they couldn't even begin to cope with. And to think that they're going to come back from that and not, you're not going to have people who have, some permanent damage is naive. Set and setting, you said it before, that's everything.
But these things well predate, the psychedelics of the LSD and mysteries. I mean, we can go back. I mean, obviously, depending on one's presuppositions, shamanistic animism might be.
But maybe they've been playing the same game for millennia.
Ad infinitum. Yeah. It's like
If you control the oracle,
Exactly.
You have a chance,
The Oracle of Delphi,
of the war, or whatever.
And you weren't a citizen of the Greek nation until you had undergone that ceremony. You weren't considered a full-fledged citizen, so they march you into Eleusis.
I thought it was popular.
They march you to Eleusis, and you consumed a beverage called pipium, which was what was that? Rye, ergot, right? I mean, you're talking about it's basically LSD, probably, the naturally occurring analog of LSD. So. Yeah, I don't know. You can speculate a lot, but when you start to find out that there are a lot of people who are not necessarily telling the truth about themselves, there's a video out there that creeped me out of Timothy Leary. It's just a 2.5-minute video, and he's dressed like a Sith Lord, and he's looking super intense, and he's talking about how basically the greatest influence in his life was Aleister Crowley, and that he considered himself to be continuing the great works of Aleister Crowley. And it wasn't enough that he looks like a Sith Lord, but he's in this video, he's sitting in front of a painting behind him, which is Christ, Christ has horns, reptilian eyes, and the number 666 between the horns, right?
Does it always have to be so
And this is the guy who
over-the-top?
was telling everybody to tune in, turn on, and drop out. And he was working for, he was supposedly fired from Harvard, right, because of his LSD work, and so that tied into the whole, this is horrible stuff, and we've got to prohibit it and ban it, which then made it, of course, more appealing to the whole '60s Vietnam War protest. Fuck the establishment generation, which my mom was, that's her whole age group now. I don't know.
Well, this is no, it's fine. I love it because this is where I get kind of curious about like where does this end in terms of the regression of I mean, this gets into Nietzsche really quick, right? Where it's like, oh, people are just willing to power, people are dominating. You know, oh, there's a group that are willing to splatter your psyche and then tell you to drink Coke. Okay, now you have a generation of Coke drinkers.
I mean, if I may just briefly try to reframe this, do we agree that psychedelics, for lack of a better term, you know, hallucinogen isn't much better probably, but that it's basically a technology and a tool, right?
Yeah, it's like neutral.
Suggestogens.
Suggestion.
Although-
Even that, but then the whole point would just be, as with any other technology or practice or anything, would just be to reclaim it and truly make it your own, and not have somebody else, you know, basically program you with it, because the risk of what you mentioned in terms of dissociation, 100% is given, you know, totally. At the same time, great integration and strengthening can also occur. And
Yes.
I can say I've witnessed both, in a sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, going back to the obelisk in 2001, like he touches the obelisk, he gets transported, he undergoes some kind of a evolution of consciousness as a result of that interaction, and then I think the next thing he does is bludgeon one of the other cavemen with a femur or something, right? So it's like you've got that
Well, you're
initial.
conflating two things. So the
Yeah.
guy at the end, yeah, okay, I mean, the opening scene, I've read the books too, so the books are really, really good.
Oh,
The
I'm just
film-
thinking of the movie. I don't
Yeah,
know the book.
okay, I'll just talk about the film, but it does a good depiction. So it starts off, the whole premise is like, look, here's the African plain and an alien item, which is interesting, and I've had like, actually this triggered part of my like Gnostic breakdown in high school reading this book, because I was just like, oh my god, this gets into binary digital symbolism and minimalism and weird shit. Anyway, I don't need to get into this, but anyway, this black monolith comes on the scene, and if you're an ape, you touch it, like, you kick in. It's almost like a high frequency, low frequency thing. Like, certain apes, like, would be like, oh my god, this hurts my ears, I'm going away. Like, you don't get the candy. If you stuck around and you enjoyed this, you are on track, son, to become whatever. And then this continues to project forward, so it's like, oh, we found a monolith on the moon. So the trajectory that was laid forth by the monkeys that touched the monolith originally in the Serengeti begat the offspring that are now on the moon. That's the end of that trajectory. Now they've touched again, it could shoot into Jupiter. That's the next evolution. So that's Jupiter and the beyond. I mean, I think that is kind of the journey we're on. And then it gets into...
I think these are symbolic, you know, metaphors. But I think the idea of them being on the moon and there being I think this is all part of the space narrative that, you know, he perfected front screen projection with 2001, and then you know, NASA borrowed the technology and then destroyed it because, you know, it's a painful process to rebuild. No, they didn't destroy it. They just kept using it and refining it and getting better and better and better at it. And build their buoyancy pools and so I think this gets back to something you were talking about before, Raphael, that came into my mind. I don't remember what you were talking about, but I think of where we are as an energy extraction matrix of, you know, on one level, and you like the trick is to figure out how not to be extracted from, which requires knowledge and discernment, and how do you know what's real and what's not, and so I said before that I think we exist in a physical material reality, but that there's like a matrix reality that's been laid over that. Call it a simulation or whatever, and the two bleed into one another because one can influence the other. You know, there are trails in the sky, and there is fluoride in the water, and there was DDT sprayed on the crops, and there are all these things that affect our physical reality that are also extracting our energy in different ways. But I think that underlying all of creation is natural law, is the fingerprint and the underlying pattern of all that is, and the more you start to understand about the way things really work, not the facts that they put in the Rockefeller school books, but the actual empirical science where there are scientific experiments that are performed where you can see a phenomenon, whether it's electrical or magnetic or it's plasma or it has to do with the movement of water, and these things are they're repeatable, they're scalable, they're testable, you can interact with them, and you can garner information from those interactions, and you can reach conclusions. And we're speaking right now through technology that was created by people who are following the scientific method and are making all kinds of discoveries, and those discoveries are leading to this technology that we're using. So there's, you know, there's something to be said for the theoretical and the imagining, but also understanding, the monitor's about to go off, understanding the world around us. It feels like so much of what we're fed in the books is specifically there to throw us off the scent of real history, what came before. One of you mentioned Tartary before, you know, the star forts, the mudfloods, all these things that the mainstream will always tell you there's no evidence to support that. That's a loony, you know, theory. But if you take the time to research it, you find out that there's not just some evidence. There's avalanches of evidence for anomalies in the official story. That after a while, you have to just take a step back and go, what is real? And then what do you start with? You start with, in my opinion, what's around you, looking at the world around you, paying attention. You know, the flat earthers are talking about, well, we see too far, right? You can zoom in on things that have supposedly gone beyond the horizon. The horizon doesn't tilt. You know, you can go up in a plane and it's still flat. People think it's not because they're looking through a window that's actually bending the light. But amateurs have sent up balloons to 120,000 feet and the horizon is rising to eye level and it's flat. So does that mean we're in a flat Earth? I don't know. The ancients, you know, their cosmologies were all the cosmic egg, where you had an enclosure, but you had a flat disk in the center. Was that a flat disk floating in space with round spinning planets? No, it was an entirely different cosmology, and the two are not compatible, right? But that cosmic egg theory, I resonate with it because the ancients had it, but it also is very closely related to the world that we live in. When we start to look at cellular structure, we start to look at how things move and flow, and vortexes and all, it's like, oh, it's as above, so below when you start looking at it like that. So I think, personally, I'm of the mind that we're in some kind of a toroidal system that it's an emanation, whether we're on the disk or whether we're on the inside of that, you know, concave Earth theories. All of these things are interesting to me. And what we can verify for ourselves is what's most interesting. I think, like, we're told that we're on a spinning ball, right? But we don't feel movement. Oh, but it's too big. Okay, but what about the storms are swirling in opposite directions depending on the hemisphere, but yet as the Earth turns, all of the atmosphere is just velcroed to the outside of the Earth, and we don't experience 1,000-mile-an-hour winds down at the equator because it's all moving at the same time. Meanwhile, storms are spiraling every which way. So, but we don't feel any movement at all, and we've got all these different motions that are supposedly happening. We've got the precession, we've got the tilt on the axis, we've got the wobble, we've got the traveling around the sun of 66,000 miles an hour, interesting number, and then we've got the 500,000-mile movement of the solar system per hour, per hour going around the spiral of the galaxy. So, but we don't experience any of that. The only proof we have of that is NASA and the Jesuit telescopes.
Well put.
And consensus reality. So, and then there's the whole simulation theory. And sometimes I'm like, is it a simulation? Like, because sometimes it seems like the more you go down these different paths of study, it almost feels like the map is filling in
Yeah,
and loading slowly, and the more you...
simulation theory, but in terms of more technical like that. Like spirituality of the path was describing.
Yeah, the Hindus spoke of Maya, and that it was, was it Krishna or Indra, or, all of the different existences being born out of the mind of God. And I think ultimately every planet and every person and everything is all just a cymatic expression of the Godhead. Whatever your religion, if you're a Christian or you're a Hindu or whatever, it's I see it as a God spoke creation into existence, and there's this cymatic emanation that's coming from that utterance, and how many of them there are. Are they fractal and holographic? Are they nestled like tissue, like cells lining up in a tissue? All of the above. But the whole simulation theory leads people away from the importance of where they are here and now and the empirical reality we find ourselves in. You can philosophize all you want, but if you whack yourself in the head with a hammer, I said this with in an interview the other day, you're going to feel a whole lot of pain, right? So you can try and deny physical reality, and it's like Zeno's paradox. You familiar with that? Zeno came to the belief that you couldn't possibly get from here to there. Because in order, what's that?
Is this the one where you cut the string infinitely in half or whatever?
Right, yeah. In order to get from here to there, you have to get halfway there first, right?
Yeah.
And then in order to get halfway there, you got to go half again, and this can keep, going down infinitely.
All right, I just got back in. I've been cooking mushrooms and decarbonizing them. I'll be ingesting them soon. I'm going to be, taking notes on the rest of it. Hopefully I'll look up some of the others, but this part about, of course, that's a mathematical trick like they do with pi. They use it in their quantum physics. You try to go halfway. It's like, it's better for American men to imagine them being on the, inside the 1 yard line, and you get a penalty. And it's not a touchdown, but you get half the distance to the goal line. Well, there's always going to be half of a half. But why would it stop? That's the thing. You wouldn't stop at half if you're right there. You would move over. But using math, they're trying to trick the string theory. And then they extrapolated that into space.
Well, it's a wonderful thought game, but it doesn't change the fact that I can reach out and grab the doorknob with my hand. So, there's your debunk right there. So he can theorize and philosophize all he wants, but if the empirical reality contradicts that, then are you going to throw that out, or are you going to okay, we just
Well, that's a
things
good
real.
example.
Then you end up with a nihilistic philosophy.
Right. I think it's Rikiko is heard it curled. We were talking about the term mind virus overlying, where it's like, as much as we think of consciousness as a gift and how much we can think and explore and create, it's also a burden. It might be a schism in a sense. I mean, that's the whole Christian kind of paradigm where it's like we've broken from a certain congruence with reality, and now we're like against the grain and freaking out about it. I don't know. There's a whole lot of doubt. Sometimes I'm more, like I said, optimistic. We're like, Jonathan Edwards, kind of, who was a Christian thinker, was like, we're in the mind of God. You were talking about being like machinations in the mind of Brahma or whatever, that kind of model.
Right.
In a weird way, I don't even understand. Maybe it's not to get all at once. But I don't know if you're into anime. We've had an episode once on me on Evangelion, and there's like there's apocalypse, but it's a Kabbalistic apotheosis at the end, and I think that's kind of what we're experiencing, like various social groups over time. I mean, your audience would probably prefer this model. Let me just put it this way. So you have all these people. I'm using the biblical kind of model, which I know you don't agree with. I'm not proselytizing with. I don't care if you agree.
I don't disagree with it. I'm agnostic right at this point when it comes to it.
You can see this actually well articulated in Waking Life. There's a good kind of housing situation being expressed, but I thought of it in this model. Of course, I'll just say it again. So you have this situation where it's like, oh look, 0 point, Abrahamic covenant happens. After that, it evolves to a point where that's ossified, so you have to have, priest class kind of come into place or whatever, and then that ossifies punctuation events. I mean, when we're talking about, and then Jesus comes, and now look at Christians, you're like, they're terrible. It's like, yeah, because we need like a relevant, Holy Spirit renovation, and that doesn't have to be Baptist, who's been baptized particularly. Like, I think that's the whole point of the New Age movement. It's like we're all waking up to this. I mean, there's a lot to this. It's not just good or just bad. People are taking advantage of this and selling and taking loose, like you're saying. Like that happens for sure. The NFL, fucking the Super Bowl is an attention-grabbing ritual. Sure, like what's not ritual, right? Like it's like we're stuck. I mean, in a Philip K. Dick sense, we're stuck in this weird time loop of the empire. So it's like, But I guess what I was getting at is it seems like I feel like we're about to punctuate, hopefully, through a new thing, and it doesn't matter if Jesuits were modeling things, it doesn't matter if three-letter agencies were co-opting movements or planting them. It's like it was all, the great work is.
And I want anybody that's still sticking with me to realize that this is our end, but it's not for 24, 25, 26, who knows? But it's coming quickly, and the idea is it's not happening. There's not going to be a pole reversal tomorrow and everything changes and then we readjust. We're heading towards a judgment in a couple of decades. We have time. That theology will be there waiting for the people looking after their many wasted, waiting on the rapture, waiting on the poles to reverse experience.
It's almost a Pierre Desjardins kind of thing, Teledar Chardin. It's like it's all this one evolving thing towards the, I mean, in my kind of sense, the transcendental object at the end of time. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes self-aware, and we're like, wow, we were all here doing this thing, pat yourself on the back, we were apart, what do you do now? Raphael, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on that, because that's the, I don't know if it's the Bashar model, but that's almost a monistic thing, because when Christians are talking about the New Jerusalem, or Isaiah, prophecy of, reconciliation and all that stuff, the things that Christians hope for, outside of like hyper-Zionist material weirdness or whatever, like quote true Christians in my mind, we're like, we want like, peace on earth and like love and that, not just like nation states domineering in a new way. Then we'll be in a new headspace. It'll be 5D. I mean, this is the new age talk. Now I can promise you that people who are taking that language and using that programming for nefarious reasons, just as much as, I mean, like you were saying, like the hoop, you're kind of questioning the veracity of the text of the Bible, and being like, these are councils of men created. Like clearly, it's an editing process. It's like nothing ever falls from the sky, really. But then it gets into perception.
Yeah, I've never seen
a
shooting star go up, for example.
No, correct. I don't know how that ties into any modeling pattern.
Well, I mean, the point being that if you start to look into empirical reality and what the actual evidence is, and I'm not talking about all the BS debunk stuff that the Mockingbird media is putting in front of people's faces, while they simultaneously censor anyone who dares to ask certain questions. You can talk all day long about aliens from Uranus coming and doing probes, That's fine. No problem at all. You can come up with the wackiest, craziest theories.
Man, I cannot wait to hear the hour that I missed, the hour and 10 minutes. It sounds like Mike is bringing home the flat earth, and he's smart. Though you might have noticed.
When you think about aliens, that's fine. But you start talking about flat earth, they're going to censor you. Oh, why? Well, because I call I'm not saying it's flat, and I don't identify as a flat earther, but
I do.
I call flat earth the skeleton key of conspiracy theories, because when you start to dig into it, it literally shows you the overlaps and where all these different points start to connect, which is pretty profound, because and then you start looking like that crazy guy with the corkboard that I was talking about before.
But that's not crazy though. You're just mapping ontological models and you see where the patchwork goes.
Well, they say we're crazy, but that's because the music that we dance to is not tuned to their ears.
Yeah, exactly.
Your vibe attracts your tribe.
Wow. Hey, some of you mudflooders, look at this red rock. It is almost like a trivalve with a man.
Right, we're the wide-eyed crazy people, but funny enough, that's what they'll say. But then when you dig into it, who are the people that are actually doing the empirical studies? They're doing laser studies. They're looking at the optics. They're looking at all the different kinds of refraction. They're contemplating the idea that, wait a minute, how does gas pressure exist next to a 10 to the negative 17 torr vacuum of space without getting sucked off into space? Well, that's a gravitational gradient, And okay, well, what about gravity? Like, clearly things go down, but has gravity really been proven? Was that a hotly debated topic back in the day? Because we have Newtonian gravity, And then that they just kind of, okay, well, it wasn't mass attracting mass because of the size of these big spinning balls. It actually turns out to be Einsteinian space-time, which is gravity. So it's a whole, people are blending these two models together and using whichever one fits their argumentation at the time. And they don't realize that oftentimes they're just spitting out a bunch of pre-programmed responses, and that they've never actually tested any of the things that they believe. And
we are pitiful for that. Ignorant are we?
And just
Forgive
to
them for they do not know. I mean, that's the situation we find ourselves in, I feel.
well,
I mean, it's
ignorance
hard.
until you look for yourself. So just allow me to shout out to Globebusters and also kind of underline what you mentioned, because this is also my experience from the podcasts and shows I've listened to, is that those that are oftentimes mocked, let's say, as flat earthers without any, since even though nobody, as I understand, within that community believes it's a flying pizza disc, so just by the way, but they actually did studies
it's sophistry. They misrepresent the argument. They strawman it, so they don't actually go and show scientifically what they claim is fact.
Exactly, and just the same thing happening with the whole sea crisis right now to the ultimate extreme. But anyways, just underlining kind of
Same thing happening in the medical world.
Exactly, and just underlining this line of thought that there is some obvious manipulation from what I understood. I believe it was, what's his name, Bob, who mentioned that they did this movie or had some producers like join them and make a movie about their experimentation and so on, all nice and dandy. Until then, exactly. Until then, suddenly, after it was already done, it got sold off to Netflix. They put a huge spin on it just to make fun of it, and so everyone, can have a laugh without actually, looking at it actually at all, So.
And so Bob became the scapegoat for the entire flat Earth community. You had half of that documentary was taken up by Patricia Steer and Mark Sargent's love affair. Like who cares? Let's go into the science. Let's go into the real salient arguments that the flat earthers are presenting, and show why they're all false. Right? If you're gonna ultimately debunk the whole thing. So they tried to present that as an impartial analysis of the flat Earth community, but it was really a hit piece. And it was a sophisticated hit piece, and I think the person who's gone through that the best is actually Rodrigo Ferrari Nunez, because he did a 3.5-hour analysis. This is a man who's got published scientific papers. He's a PhD in anthropology, and he started to study the flat Earth movement from an anthropological perspective, and went in and started looking at the arguments and looking at what people were saying and interviewing a lot of the biggest names in the community. And so when that came out, he was just like, this is utter bunk. It's clear that this is a smear campaign, but they're trying to present it as something else, and when you see the flat earther talking, the camera's slightly out of focus and moving, but when it's one of the experts talking, it's high definition, nice lighting with a nice sophisticated looking background behind it, and they're misrepresenting the testing that was happening. And then there was this thing with the ring laser gyro, and they started claiming after the fact that Bob Nodell had proved the spin of the Earth with his ring laser gyro.
Right.
Oh, right, which makes the flat earthers look like real idiots. Except, wait a minute, nobody's ever actually proven the spin of the Earth, and if Bob Nodell actually had, then he should be lined up for a Nobel Prize, because he's done something scientifically that nobody's ever done. But the ridiculous thing is that he wasn't even the one who had the gyro or did the experiment in the first place. So they caught him on camera, and it's like this little hidden camera, and that was the big reveal, that and Jaren's botched experiment towards the end, which had everything to do with the fact that they went out on a really hot day where there's a lot of evaporation, a lot of moisture in the air. It was creating the greatest amount of atmospheric diffusion that you could ask for, which is exactly what Netflix wanted, because they wanted to misrepresent the test. And they never covered the fact that he went back later during the winter when it was like cold, cold conditions, and got a completely different result. So it's been the same thing every step of the way. And the reason I know a lot about this community is because, like I said, my friend, a good friend, is Conspiracy Music Guru, who's a musician, who's a comedian, and he's hilarious. You said, Jim, you you're not familiar with him, but you might
No,
have seen
I'll
videos of his and not realize that you were seeing them.
I'll totally check it
I'll let
out.
you explore it, but he was invited over to Denver in 2018, I think. I think that's what it was. To perform. You know, he was like the key performer because his music was so loved by that community, and he's my best friend. So I went over, you know, as support crew, and was on my way to California to visit my family, and I got to meet a lot of these people in person, and they were like Bob Nodell, for example, and others, and you know, genuine people who were asking very valid and interesting questions, and then you get the people who oppose them online, you know, like the Simon Dans and the Professor Daves, and they're constantly representing the argument and using all kinds of fallacies while simultaneously claiming to be staunch supporters of science and defenders of the scientific method, and we got to put these ridiculous flat earthers out of business because they're going to corrupt the minds of you know, innocent, naive people and get them believing the most ridiculous thing that you could possibly believe.
Projection.
Really,
Projection.
yeah, I was about to say that's the really, because this gets really quickly.
Yeah, hypocrisy much.
Well, everybody's a hypocrite. The way of like says,
Yeah.
hell is hypocrisy on earth. So we're in hell in a way. We're being misaligned like that. But that's kind of where it gets tricky because it gets into deeper kind of. I mean, one would say maybe mystery schools like or you know religious Buddhism, whatever, have been trying to tell you how like ways to try to
Kabbalistic inversion.
anything. But then these
Perhaps.
might be so it's like it's tricky because during Gene Keys, we had Richard Rudd on. He did the Gene Keys, and which is kind of a system. I mean, what's not a system, right? But he's also a Virgo, actually. Stellium also. We appreciate him. But in any event, he he says things in them to the point where it's obvious. It's the cliche of like all the roads lead to this place. And I don't want to be that universalist where I'm like, it's all relative, it doesn't matter. I think it probably ultimately is. But in some weird way, it's like somebody's nirvana is going to come through drinking the shit out of like alcohol. Somebody's going to like do acid and get it. Somebody's going to be a staunch,
somebody's going to be a
Luther type.
Bacchus, somebody's going to be a Pan, somebody's going to be a...
And it's weird because I think ultimately I think we're going to laugh one day and be like, we have so much more control. I don't know, because the way you're painting it makes, that's how, I'm not saying I'm past it, I think I was more prone towards, fearful is maybe the right word, just like worried, like, I'm like, oh my god, all this stuff, and Raphael's actually very much helped me, come to a place that if it's like an opiate for my psyche, that's fine, it is what it is, but it's like, at levels, like there's karma and there's, things playing out that we can't understand that are not geopolitically driven or not scarcely resource driven or are not, racially driven. Anyway, it's a lot more unified than we think, and we pay attention to the details. It's kind of like tripping, it's like it's all happening at once, and it's like, what are you focusing on?
Well, I would like to mention though at the same time, what I always like to harp on, in parallel, let's say, just all the things that you mentioned, Mike, in terms of I think it's super relevant to be aware of all of those sides, to be aware of who's playing what side, who's coming along with what agenda, even though it may ultimately, in my view at least, still be a hologram in the game, and ultimately everything being made out of the body of the one creator itself, so therefore all the separation is just, the game we're playing. However, still, even within that framework, I totally want to weed out, let's say, all the bad apples, by the fruits you shall know them, because then we can just enjoy this plane of existence, without having all these, whatever you want to call them, psychic vampires or whatever, trying to siphon off your energy and the controller factor trying to program you and all of that. And it certainly seems, maybe also with the overdrive we've gone into, and maybe be curious to see what you think about this, Mike, just like Jim said, that we may be at some sort of a punctuation point event.
The dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Yeah, well, yeah, but what's the alternative,
Yeah, better a dawning of an age of Aquarius than, I don't know, whatever this crazy world seems to be heading towards. Well, I mean, this gets back into what I was talking about before, I think, with discernment. And in order to make good decisions, and not, go down paths that are going to lead you stray, you have to study a lot, and you have to learn how to recognize fallacies. You know, we're not taught logic in school. Why do you think? Maybe they don't want us to know logic. This gets into Jan Irvin's work again. He talks about the trivium. You know, it's grammar, rhetoric, and logic being cornerstones of real learning that we're not given, because, you know, it's one thing to be taught facts that you memorize. It's another thing to be taught how to learn and how to question and how to recognize fallacious reasoning and sophistry and people who are, you know, engaging in logical fallacies, sometimes without even realizing it or knowing, or sometimes intentionally because they want to mislead you. And so that gets in a bit to this whole idea of what is real, and you know, that ties into the work that I've done over the last few years now with regards to the mountain and the rocks and everything, which we haven't talked about at all in this conversation. But at some point, I stopped having faith in the high priests of scientism and started.
It is a high priest card, actually, a high priestess. Because the whole point is scientism is almost this hierarchy. It's like, here's the truth, here's what it is, don't question it.
Yeah, the Hierophant is the it's the centaur, right? Half man, half animal, and I think it's, I don't know, that's yeah, it's oh, there was something I was thinking of.
I would love to hear you and Rodrigo. No, I totally fucked you up. You and Rodrigo went Virgos, and like, you know, but there's certain people I'll have to go listen to those episodes of you guys talking, because I'm sure that was pretty covered a lot of territory.
We'll make sure to
a lot
link
of
it.
yeah, high pixel refresh rate on those conversations, no doubt. Because two Virgos, he's got a third house. I mean, astrologically, he's very talkative. He could talk for hours by himself. So I'm sure you guys have an interesting chat.
Well,
So,
I met him first in Barcelona in person, and Alex was invited to a flat Earth convention there, and it's only a 5-hour drive, so we went up the coast, and he performed a couple of songs at the end of his weekend, and Rodrigo was there, and we hit it off right away and started talking about all kinds of stuff, and he has a very broad knowledge base. With all of his academic study, but also his personal interests. And so when he started to hear about the work that I'd done on the mountain, that was really mind-blowing. You guys were talking about the Book of Enoch earlier. You've mentioned giants several times, but the Book of Enoch specifically mentions titans. And it actually spells out the size of the titans, 3,000 ells, and that comes to roughly about a mile high. Creatures that were a mile high in this book, which was referenced in the Bible. so it's from the same time period. Whether or not they're both manipulated texts and they're there to mislead, I don't know. But this is something that I didn't even know about until I started to look into this subject more. And Rodrigo found it very interesting from the beginning, because he was familiar with the work, or not the work, but the tales of the Salish Indians in North America, who are this tribe that discusses what are known as the transformer stones. I think I'm ODing on the yerba mate. I need to get some regular water. So the transformer stones are these beings that can turn into stone and then turn back into moving beings. And this is a tradition that they have, and there's certain places that are known as sacred sites. And so Rodrigo was familiar with this, and I hadn't heard of it. So when he saw the work that I was doing on the mountain, he was like totally blown away, because I approached it following the scientific method as best I could, because I knew from the beginning, when I first started to wake up to what I was seeing and finding. Do you even know what I'm talking about right now, Jim?
Much less so than I probably should.
Okay, so-
yeah, like I didn't.
Yeah.
You've done a good job of avoiding the primer. I mean, if you want to go into town.
Yeah, we're dancing around the whole stuff. Why is this guy even on your show?
Oh, cool.
Tyson Blood. Here we are.
So, yeah, so when I started to question the nature of our physical reality more than I ever had, because I started to realize that some of the fundamental premises about the nature of our physical reality were built as a house of cards, that was when I was like, okay, well then what is real and what is the real scenario here? And initially, there were a lot of things in the whole flat Earth movement that made a lot of sense to me. And the more I tried to debunk it, the deeper into it I got, because the evidence that I was turning to try and throw it out was hogwash. And so tying that into, then I started looking into all kinds of other avenues of research that were out there, and that led me to things like Tartaria and mudfloods and star forts and hidden history, and then also channels that were touching on the whole mud fossil topic, which is the idea that fossilization can happen much more quickly, and that led to places like Mud Fossil University and Flat Earth Nation, who were two Christian guys that are kind of diametrically opposed and at war with each other, both claiming to be the progenitors of the...
Yeah, one of us is right and one of us is wrong. I'm the flat earther.
The ideas, and one is a staunch hellfire and damnation Bible preaching
That's me.
guy who is very, very much a flat earther. In fact, his channel is called Flat Earth Nation. And then you've got the other guy who hates flat earthers with a passion and is a vehement anti-flat earther. He's very much into space and has all kinds of theories.
Man,
about,
Mike, you make it sound like it was fun or something. This is not fun. This is not fun.
Stuff that NASA's presenting on top of the mud fossil theory. And I never quite understood how those could gel, because when you dig into the Bible, it appears to be a flat earth book in many respects, because there's so many passages that refer specifically to its immobility and its, that it's not in movement, and firmaments, and it's like, and Werner von Braun's tombstone.
Exactly my thought at this moment.
Mr. Paperclip himself, so anyway, let's see. So the Book of Enoch, and looking at fossils differently, and understanding that maybe a lot of the rocks that we see weren't formed over hundreds of millions of years like we're taught, but are actually the remains of creatures, big and small, that lived not so long ago. Because Rogers, his main thing is the mud fossils, and he's got DNA evidence supposedly to prove it. He's got 3 different DNA tests that were done at a supposedly reputable laboratory, which I've never dug into or looked into. But you can download the PDFs from his website, and they seem to be pretty authentic, and there's a whole lot of stuff in there that has to do with chemistry that I don't know anything about. I've studied a lot of science, I've studied a lot of anatomy and histology, which is the study of tissues and different things in my chiropractic education, but I didn't go very deep into things like chemistry or, that sort of stuff. So he had he talks about, and he's got...
You're like, I'm sorry, I'm not the vanilla.
Yeah, but he's super confident, and he's one of these guys that he's right about everything, and that always lets me out people. And, there's no room for doubt. This is what it is. This is what I say it is, unequivocally. No.
That's sketchy.
That's sketchy as fuck to me. It's like, but I've learned to. I'm a selective sifter, and I'm a dot connector, and I don't take anything at face value. And if something fits with something else, I take that puzzle piece and I move on and try and make sense of it all. And so mud fossil thing, that made sense to me. But then he started talking about this 900-mile long dragon in the Sahara Desert, and he does so many videos on this. So I was a little amazed by it, because the more he went into it, I was like, okay, there's a plausibility there.
Yeah, no way. Roger's crazy with all of that nonsense.
friend, it seemed to have tie-ins to Plato's writings, where Plato discusses this great battle between the Leviathan and the Behemoth, and actually states the location according to Roger Spiro. I've never checked the primaries myself, but and that supposedly these gigantic beings were fighting it out in this exact place where Roger's looking at them on Google Earth in the Sahara Desert. So it's like, okay, well, there's another thing to just kind of keep in the back of the mind. And then J.G. Reimers did this video called Petrified Titans, and he was synthesizing Titan research, mythology, religion, mud fossil universities work into one big package, and showing a bunch of interesting geological formations and pictures, like what you were describing before. Someone lying on, looks like the mountain range looks like somebody lying on their back. And some of the pictures were very convincing, and others were like, maybe. But then he had some pictures of a couple. There's an island in Hawaii, and then there was another one that was a rock structure in Iceland, and they looked so much like elephants, just crazy. But
I would think it was an elephant rock that looked like an elephant line, and then a snake in Thailand. I was like, that looks like a snake.
That is incredibly convincing. The Naga in Thailand.
Yeah. I was like,
that's like, tell me how that formed with sedimentary layering. Give me a break. Oh, erosion. Water runoff. No way those patterns came from that. Oh, so then what's it going to be? Well, it must have been lava, right? Lava just miraculously dried in that way. That's the same thing they say about Devil's Tower. It's like lava pushed upward, and then it cooled in this way that made these perfect hexagonal shapes. Or maybe they're not perfect, but I don't know. To me, that looks like something that grew. It looks biological. A lot of the tree stumps out there, a lot of the plateaus look a lot like tree stumps. Now, there's other guys who think that they're mining remains, that they've just carved away at everything, and all that's left is that plateau, but it's showing all the telltale signs of a grand scale mining operation. I think that that's true in some scenarios, but I think in other scenarios it's trees, and I think in other scenarios it's titans. And the island and the Iceland thing that I saw were just like, that was the penny drop for me, because the town that I live in here in Spain has this big mountain that looks exactly like an elephant. And it's just, it looks like an elephant lying on its stomach with the head tilted back, and there's a sloping, protuberance that comes off and becomes a plateau where the front limbs or the trunk would be. And there's a big cave with an eye right where the eye should be. And that, so that gets into the realm of pareidolia, which is this idea that we're seeing things that aren't really there. Look at a structure and it looks a certain way. Yeah, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the shadows hit it just right, then it looks like a face or a person. But from any other angle or any other time of day, it's just a bunch of rock.
However, as far as I understand the way you looked at it, you look at specific anatomical features as well, whereas it wouldn't matter where the light is coming from, right? It is like very specific.
Right. Yeah.
Markers.
So the first thing I did was I got on Google Earth and I started touring around this mountain in 3D, which is an amazing feature that Google Earth allows you to do in some places where you've got the actual 3D. Like a lot of places around the world, when you go down and you try to go in the 3D mode, it's just all flat. But in areas of high population or tourist attractions, and they've got a much higher definition resolution of the satellites going over and taking all their pictures, right? The satelloons, whatever you want to call them. So I'm zooming around this thing, and it's like the head has a head shape. There's curves inward where the neck would become the shoulder. There's a deep canyon right between the legs. The eye is in the right location. Where the ear is, there's a quarter moon discoloration. It's white or gray, the whole exterior of the mountain. But wherever the rock is broken away, it's reddish, which is like, okay, so if the rock was removed, well, could that have been an ear attachment? You know, it's just like right off the bat, after like an hour of scouring this mountain on Google Earth, I had like 10 anatomical correlations. And that was in 3D. That wasn't me looking at a mountainside going, oh, it looks like a face, right? That was like, okay, this is bizarre, and the eye was properly located and it was properly shaped. So then I noticed this is when because I'm like, okay, I got to get out the anatomy books. There's a, you know, I have human anatomy. I don't have elephant anatomy here, but I had some really good anatomy books, and I started pulling them out because I knew that the eye socket is comprised of 7 bones, and those bones meet in places that are known as sutures,
There's that
and then
number
they're
7 again, by the way.
yeah, and then there are channels going through those bones that permit the blood vessels and the optic nerve to travel. So I had been at that cave already 7 or 8 times in my you know, years. I've been here 10 years now, and I was always amazed because the rocky structures in that cave, which I have loads of footage filmed inside and going up to the cave, so you can see all this in the Unveiling the Titan series that I did. It's a 5, it's about to be a 6-part series, and the first one was just an overview. The second one is of the eye, and so I said, okay, I don't want to come off as an absolute idiot thinking, hey, this big, you know, 1 mile tall, 3 mile long mountain is really an elephant. It doesn't just look like one. You know, it's like that's a good way to get people to roll their eyes and walk away, you know. So I said, if there's any truth to this, with the eye so well preserved, I should be able to get in there and find some anatomical correlations that are just really specific and can't be explained away. And those combined with the other things that I was finding around, you know, as far as the macro structure of the mountain, that would, you know, get into hard to explain by coincidence kind of levels already. Because every time you add a specific thing to that list, you're increasing the odds against finding such a feature. So that's how I've approached it. I don't have a scientific experiment that I can do. I can't compare it to other Titans, and you know. So I had a laundry list of features that I would expect to find. One of them was the infraorbital foramen, which is a little hole that exists just below our eyes, and it's right in the middle in the maxilla bone, just below our eyes. Well, in elephants, it's just slightly in front of the eye, especially if the head is tilted backward. And I spotted that on Google Earth already when I was looking, and that's exactly, so there's a cave, there's like the big cave, which is the eye, then there's a small cave going through and opening up exactly where the infraorbital foramen would be. And if you see the thumbnail on the Unveiling a Titan series, the 5th of the videos, you can see a photograph looking through that, and it's me and Andreas is Andreas is in that picture.
So I definitely have seen some of the stuff that, because I was about to say, has Andreas visited you? I think I've seen some footage of that. So that makes the Starport circle.
Yeah.
So yeah, I witnessed you guys visit a Starport or a cave, and I think that's what you were talking about.
Oh, now's a
Like,
good time to,
vaguely
you know,
talking
yeah.
about this.
So that was, I featured that footage of him and I going, and Victor was there also. We had so much fun. So I showed them, we hiked up there, I showed them the eye, I showed them these features that I had already identified and laid out in the second video. Because in that first visit up to the eye, I found, in the space of about an hour or 2 hours, I found between 8 and 10 different anatomical features that matched with an eye socket, which is like crazy. Like between the frontal bone above the eyes and the maxilla below the eyes, those 2 bones meet right in the inside of the eyes in a line, which is called a suture. And that suture, if you look at an elephant skull, and I show this in the second video, there's an overlap of rock in the cave that is in a line that is exactly where it should be. I mean, that's incredibly specific. There are channels going back that are exactly where the optic nerve should go. And then later on, we discovered that there a rocky structure that I theorized was the eyeball, but I didn't have any evidence for it. It's this cresting wave structure that sticks up, and below it are all these clumpy rocks. And I was like, wow, I wonder if that could be the remains of the eyeball. Well, later on, when I was there with Andreas and Victor, one of the two of them, I don't remember which, pointed out that the whole back side of this structure was covered in a 10-inch thick layer of crystal. And when he pointed that out, I was like, I never noticed that. And I just, my brain went, because if you look at the structure of the back side of an eyeball, and I've got pictures of this in the videos, you've got the eye, which is filled with it's got a gelatinous substance in the center of the eye. And then you have the optic nerve coming out the back. And then you have a big, fatty, clumpy portion that attaches the optic nerve to the sclera, which is the white of the eyes. And that whole structure is fat. So I already had the theory from the fourth video that I did, which was on the histology of Moltke, which is the tissues, that fat petrifies into crystal. And I believe that that's true of blood plasma, and I believe that it's true of any fatty material on a Titan is going to petrify into quartz, or into some kind of crystal like quartz. So that moment when they showed this crystalline structure, and not only was the whole backside of this cresting wave, and when you see the side-by-side pictures of what an eyeball looks like and what footage that we got up there shows, you'll see that I'm not just cherry picking, because that's what the critics are going to say.
No, you're seeing rather scrutinous.
First pareidolia, right? You're just seeing things you want to see in the clouds or in the mountains. Not pareidolia when you got a ton of very, very specific coincidences that line up to anatomy. It's no longer pareidolia. Now it's a potential phenomenon. Now the next criticism is cherry picking, right? Well, you're finding phenomena, or you're finding empirical evidence, and then you're bending your story to fit that evidence, right? So it's an intellectual dishonesty that can happen either unconsciously because you just want to believe it, and so you're convincing yourself that it's true, and so you're making shit up without even realizing you're doing it, or it's sophistry, it's an intention to mislead people by picking specific evidence that's going to match your ridiculous belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in order to sidestep that criticism, I tried to address it up front, and I talk about all these things in my videos. And I talk about, from the very first video, I was talking about pareidolia, and then I was talking about cherry picking, and I was talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect as well, which they're also accusing me of, because well, go study some chemistry, go study some geology, right? You think this is real? Why don't you just go take a basic course in geology? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if what I found is true, major cornerstones of geology are not.
Amen.
So why am I going to go and study what they tell me? Because it's just going to get me thinking exactly like
And that
you.
goes for you
And then I
too.
would never have noticed any of these things if I hadn't taken the time to go, are the things that we've been told about the nature of rocks and petrogenesis, which is the formation of rocks, are they even true? Is there basis in fact? And they tell us all these stories of hundreds of millions of years of sedimentary layers that are then pushed upward by tectonic activity, break off into smaller and smaller bits, and then erode and become smooth. And then that's how we got all of our rocks. Either that or volcanoes. Or metamorphic rock, which is a blend of the two, where the layers are pushed down to the Earth's mantle, where it's so hot that they literally start to morph and change, and then you get this metamorphic rock, like granite and marble and all these. And that's how, those are the three kinds of rocks, and that's how it all came about. But then you see all this, what I've coined the term biogeology, where you start to look at these structures around the world. And in the last couple of years, I've seen the most amazing pictures of stuff that I never had a clue existed, never in any school books that I saw as a kid, wonder why. Were they not discovered? Were they not known about? No, but they're definitely not promoted because they're really hard to explain, because they look a whole lot more like, muscle and bone and all kinds of other things that can't be explained in my mind by the official models. So, yeah, scales like the naga that we were talking about in Thailand. In the video with Rodrigo that we did, we started talking about. There's a researcher who saw my work, and his mind went because he was living in Thailand and he was seeing all the same rocks that I was showing and a whole bunch I wasn't showing, but on a much grander scale. And now we get into the fractal thing with Roger Spur's work with the dragon in the Sahara. Well, I've got no problem accepting that, because if there's a fractal holographic nature to reality, then if there's a 3-mile dragon or a 3-mile elephant, then I got no problem. I got no problem with a 900-mile one. You know, that exists perhaps as well, and there seemed to be some evidence for it. You know, he wasn't a boots on the ground researcher. In fact, he doesn't even show his face on videos, which I think is suspicious personally.
Yeah.
Don't suspect anything. I came out of camera earlier.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Roger from Mud Fossils University.
Gotcha.
Mm.
2 things coming up.
Who has never mentioned my work to his following, which is very fascinating, because I've mentioned his work on many occasions, and he has never addressed any of the work that I've done on the mountain or the Heartstones in any of his videos. I think he's mentioned like little tiny things, but he's never featured the information in any way. And he and I have had debates about it, gone back and forth, and he's like a flat Earth hater. And there's a lot of flat earthers that love the stuff that I've done. A lot of Christians that love the stuff I've done. A lot of just thinking, rational people who are looking at what I'm presenting going, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people who sent me messages and letters just thanking me because, wow, you've really changed my relationship to nature and to the world around me, and to how I see the world and how I see the stones. And I'm forever grateful for this and indebted to you. And it's like, okay, I hope I'm not wrong. You know, I'm sharing my delusion with others. And this is what somebody like.
So it's okay. So we're all in the dream, right?
I don't know. Is it a dream? Maybe God's dream, but I have a dream experience, and then I have a waking experience, and it sure doesn't feel like a dream. Anyway.
There's a game called God of War, which is really fun. It's actually an origin story for Loki through. It's complicated, this Norwegian kind of mythology and stuff. Very fun PlayStation game.
It
But anyway,
touches on Titans, right?
Exactly. I was getting into that. That's like
Yeah.
my awareness and stuff. Like you're actually in the
Yeah.
eye socket of a giant.
You have Attack on Titan. You have
Which I was gonna
you
bring
know,
up.
you have Jack and the Beanstalk. You have.
Are you kidding me?
You have dragons in general. Like I think the dinosaur narrative is to hide from the truth of giants and titans and dragons. That's my take. Is that like they don't want us to know the real history. All of the well, not all, but many civilizations around the world have dragon mythology. It may be a metaphor for some kind of a plasma apocalypse high energy event, because Lichtenberg figures look a lot like dragons. And when you see, you know, electrodes hit wood and burn, it burns in this fractal pattern, just like trees grow and our lungs grow. So there's your, Mandelbrot set, fractal, holographic, everything. So dragon may be a metaphor for some kind of a grounding out of plasma and some kind of a, you know, end of the world as we know it event. Or maybe there were real dragons. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were real dragons also. But I'm sure that the other stuff also probably happened. And when you get into Thunderbolt's project and the Primordials and all these guys, I think that they're not flat earthers, but they're putting out a lot of great information. In fact, Mungo Jubb has got some of the best videos in support of my research. I've reached out to him, but I've never heard back. And I don't know if he even knows of my work, but he's done some videos on instant petrification and different theories behind how that can happen, and different examples in the fossil record of things that can't be explained in the mainstream geological explanation. So that's fascinating research. Mungo Jubb, I can recommend his instant petrification videos. Yeah, so Dunning-Kruger effect, I mentioned that before, that's when you know just enough about something that you think you're an expert and you really aren't, and so then you can start to make a bunch of
I must be
claims that are...
fully guilty of that. I am like so badly affected by this effect. Barely.
We all are sometimes.
Well, I don't feel
You know.
bad about it because I'm a Gemini, whatever.
I coined the term paradigm blindness, and I think that we all suffer from that in different categories of life, and when it comes to cosmology and our realm and everything, I think most people are suffering from that in just about every category of life because they don't really understand the nature of how this place that we're living in is functioning, how it's run, who's running it, why they're running it the way they are, why are some things fake, why is there such an attack on things like alternative medicine, which was the real and original medicine, all in favor of what we're getting now, which is, you know, is there a solid foundation in science there, really, behind what's happened over the last year and a half? I mean, pose that as a question, not to be answered here. That's a boring subject I'm tired of talking about.
You're cool, yeah.
Well, thank you. I just want to make sure we're already well past 2 hours, so we may also wind it down. But I just want to make sure, in your own line of reasoning, Mike, you got through all the effects. Basically, you want to make sure to divert. I mean, I guess you don't really have to explain that in that way to our audience, but it's a nice walkthrough. So I just want to make sure.
We've got the most
you're
open-minded audience that's out there. I would imagine, based on your subject matter. Someone once said, you know, keep your mind open, but don't open your mind so far that your brain falls out. You know, and so we should be skeptical. We should attempt to exercise discernment, not just buy every crazy theory that comes our way, and make use of an understanding about things like logic and you know, the scientific method, the real scientific method. You know, which, in order to even apply it, you have to have some understanding about logical fallacies and understand when people, like, you know, there's so many flaws in the cosmological model that we've all been fed, and we're taught not to question it. If you dare to question it, you're the dumbest person alive. That's a logical fallacy. That's appeal to ridicule. I don't have to address your argument because it's stupid and you're an idiot. Oh, that's an ad hominem attack. There's another logical fallacy. I'm going to attack the person who's delivering the argument rather than attack their argument. Then I'm going to build up a straw man, which is I'm going to pretend that your argument is one thing that it actually isn't, so that then I can tear that argument down and call you an idiot. You know, and so these are not scientific methods. This is sophistry method, and people, you know, it's amazing. Like Simon Dan did a video on my channel, and
really? Wow.
You didn't see that?
No,
it's a
no,
12-minute expose.
But is he linking your channel actually, so that people can really go check it out, like yourself?
Oh yeah. Oh, and boy did they. Oh
nice.
Man.
Well,
and what I can tell you
yeah,
is
I mean,
that's
we
a
know
segment
the
of the
comments,
population that I have no interest in entertaining.
Yeah, right.
Because they are people who have not only not opened their mind, but their mind is in such a tightly closed box that anything that isn't what they already believe couldn't possibly be true. And this guy Simon Dan, he's got 450,000 followers, and he's presenting himself as a great champion of the scientific method. And he's out there to take down the flat earthers and these pseudo-scientific quacks that are misleading the herd and all these things. And he uses mockery, and he uses all kinds of fallacious reasoning, and you know, laugh tracks, and you know, he's just, the guy is a shill. He's either completely paradigm blind and he truly believes in what he's doing, or he's paid to mislead people, because even if the flat earth is not true, they have some very, very interesting arguments, and people could grow and learn a great deal by actually engaging in scientific debate and entertaining ideas they've never ever entertained before, so that then they could see why the things that they believe are true are actually true. You know, we were taught that Eratosthenes measured the size of the earth with 2 sticks at a certain distance apart, and the shadows were different here than they were here at the same time of day. They never tell us how they measured out the distance or how they synced their measurement times so that they were, okay, maybe they used a sundial or whatever, but what they don't tell you is that you get the exact same results with a smaller, nearer sun. All the cosmological models that are flat Earth models, the cosmic egg, they have the sun and the moon, which are smaller, and they're closer. They're within the firmament. So to present the flat earther argument as a disk floating in space and the sun is going around the disk like this, and how do you explain day and night, and how do you explain seasons and all these things, that's ridiculous. You're misrepresenting their arguments. So this happens all the time, and this is exactly what Simon and Dan did with my channel. He took the first video, he paused it in certain places where he could mock things, then he made one claim about something which was something that I had already addressed in the video thoroughly, but he misrepresented the claim without even going into what I said. And then he showed my list of coincidences, which was like 40 long, of different anatomical features with the mountain. And he picked out one, misrepresented it, and said, because that is not true, I'm not even going to bother to look at the rest of this stuff. So he threw out the other 39 based on the fact that the one that he chose to look at in that moment had to be false based on his worldview. So I mean, this is the opposite of the scientific method. And he's not recognizing any of the... I might have made errors. He could go into my research and he could show me why it was wrong and start picking through it. But that wasn't done at all. So that's, that sent a
Some
wave
people
of...
pursue the spirit of knowledge as like a heart of exploration, and some people just want to bludgeon you with correctness. That's a spirit difference. That's a whole different topic. But like, this guy wasn't interested in necessarily expounding his map. He just wants to be right.
Yeah, he's got a following. He's making good money doing what he does.
Yeah, but he's not coming out of nowhere. I mean, he's been popular a long time ago, and I'm not even English or anything, but he's like an old guy, no? And he's like built up fame over years, no? Or
No,
he's a younger guy. Oh, maybe there's
younger guy.
mixing up with someone else. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
No, there's several guys. There's a guy, a black guy named Greater Sapien. There's Professor Dave. He's got well over 1 million followers now. It's like these guys would never have this kind of following if it hadn't been for the Google algorithms.
Of course.
2.5, 3 years ago, because it was growing exponentially at that point. People were starting to really look at it. And now you just have a bunch of material out there that's meant to throw people off the track and to misrepresent the actual arguments and to show, oh, these guys are a bunch of pseudoscientific quacks, just like behind the curve did. Yeah, it's astonishing, the battle. You would think, this would have been the most interesting thing to study. We're taught both to go over the horizon in school, or I was when I was a kid. And it's like now the P900 will bring it back from behind the horizon. So did it go over the horizon? Are we literally seeing around the corner? I mean, I know how you can use mirrors to see around corners, but I've never seen around the corner in my, existence. And so then it's like, okay, was it really? It's disappearing bottom up. Well, is that a byproduct of atmospheric occlusion and different kinds of refraction, or a Fata Morgana mirage? Yeah, it's a product of all these things, and also perspective, and what do we know about perspective? What are we talking? So these are all things that instead you get the science fairs in high school, where it's like, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to make the volcano? Or are you going to do the dinosaur? Or are you going to do something about the climate and how we're destroying the climate by how we're living? And it's like, it's one of those usually, and or the solar model, right? You get the sun and the planet, so the heliocentric model. So that's the extent of our scientific method when we're in high school. And none of this stuff that would really open people's minds and trigger debate and teach them cognitive reasoning skills. And let's go back to the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, because that's going to help you to discern liars from truth tellers, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always say I don't know what the fuck's going on. I'm not an expert. I'm a student of life. I'm a child who's watching a movie. Anybody who's like, I'm certain, like I can tell you what I've experienced, and you know, who knows. But certainty's an illusion. It's an interesting trip we're on, and it's always fun to kind of not only find nested groups of like-minded individuals. It seems like you, Rodrigo, Rafael, like there's a certain cluster of, you know, like a movement, I guess you could say, or whatever, of people on like minds. But it's also interesting to see. I mean, even just sociologically, you were kind of musing about the algorithms in Google and, you know, success versus not and all this. Life is a weird trip. It is so funny. So hopefully you've been doing all right during this whole, you know, COVID thing I've never mentioned before. But I really do hope you come back on and shoot the shit sometime. You're a smart guy. I'll definitely be checking out your content, obviously. So I think we did a good job of getting to know you outside of that. So when we get you back on, we'll really kind of go hard into that, maybe with other people that you want on or not, just yourself if you want a presentation or whatever. But yeah, I appreciate you giving us your time and energy. You're cool. Yeah, you're a fun Virgo, and yeah, it seems like you've been doing your research, so you might as well tell us what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I'll just summarize a couple of things. One is I didn't really touch on the work I did with the heartstones at all. That after I started looking at geology with new eyes, I started to recognize patterns in a number of the stones that weren't part of the mountain, but were in the valley and in the river bottoms and in the foothills that were completely different kinds of stone. And I recognized a pattern there, and I've done a whole bunch of videos showing the reoccurrence of these patterns and how this ties into anatomy. So these are not creatures that have been compressed under the seafloor and fossilized and then have revealed themselves. I'm not talking about that kind of a fossil at all. I'm talking about something totally different, which is literally petrified organs. And I've done a number of videos on that topic. And we're taught in mainstream geology that is impossible, that organs can't petrify. And I present a lot of evidence to the contrary, and people can check that out and decide for themselves if what I present is making any sense. I also wanted to just say the sixth video I'm working on in the next few days, I hope to be done with it. Might take as much as a week. That's touching on some additional findings that I haven't covered yet in the Day on the Titan series. I made a couple of additional discoveries, and I also the critics who were that did have some actual criticisms about the research. I'm addressing some of those criticisms in the video as well. And the last thing is, why the lie, right? When people start to get into cosmology, earth shape, geology, all these different things, the assumption is so many people couldn't have been lying for so long, and if they start to be presented with information that contradicts their belief structure, a lot of times they don't bother to verify any of that information. They immediately jump to the why the lie thing, which ties into the so many people couldn't be in on the lie fallacy. And the why the lie question is interesting, because if you're intellectually honest and you start to go and try and verify for yourself what you've been taught about the nature of your reality and look for things that are anomalies to those conclusions, then that gives you an opportunity to engage in analysis and intellectual honesty. And if you jump straight to the why the lie, and then you throw it out because it couldn't possibly be such a big lie, then you're never going to start to spot these other things. And I think that there is an empirical reality that we're living in, and the why the lie question becomes the most important question of all, I think, ultimately. Because
So that might be the
gets
title
to
of the
why we're here.
Why the lie? That could be a total rabbit hole in itself. No, I'm glad. So you're working on some stuff. We'll put the links. Rafael, is there anything, or Mike, are there any kind of parting thoughts? And then we'll definitely get you back on sooner than later.
Yeah, Mike, anything you'd like to mention in parting?
No, I think we've probably got a ton of loose threads out there.
Which is great. Which is great.
Yeah. So maybe on further reviews, somebody in the comment threads can say, hey, you guys started to talk about it, but you never finished, or something like that. We'll get back to it later. But so I'm going to do this video that I'm working on now. I have some interviews, like this one perhaps, and others that I'll start releasing on my channel that I haven't ever put there, that I've done on other channels. There's a whole load of wild synchronicities that have happened related to the Heartstone research that I've done, related to just different interactions with different people. We touched on some of those people today, but other people
I
have
just
just
wanna say
contacted me out of the
something.
blue. Yeah.
I live in the Colorado Rockies. My mom is obsessed with finding heart-shaped things, clouds, whatever, and she collects rocks that are shaped like hearts. So you keep saying Heartstone, I'm like, my mom is obsessed with
Well, wait till you see my Heartstone research.
I might have seen it.
Blow
This
your
is
mind.
ringing a bell. A couple of years ago, I seen it. It's like 3-5 years old. I might have seen this, but if it's really recent, I have
Heartstone
not
stuff started about 2 years ago. That was when
Okay.
I found the first one.
Then I have no clue about it. Never.
Yeah, I think it's been about 3 years since I started working on the Unveiling the Titan series.
Word. Well, we will continue to tie loose threads with you in the future, Mike. And yeah, it'll be an adventure to check out your material and pick your brain. You're, like I said, a cogent individual with an open mind, and that's about as good as it gets. So, props. So, I guess.
Thank you very much. I feel the same about you guys.
Yeah, we try. We're just trying to chill.
Birds of a
I can't
feather.
be profitable. Exactement. So, yeah, enjoy Spain, and hopefully when traveling and stuff starts going back around. I mean, I've been to Europe for lunch. I'd love to go back. So hopefully we meet up at some point, check out some of these starports, and I'll go into a giant's eye. I don't give a shit. Like, I'll try it out.
There's very interesting starports here.
Yeah, that's what I heard. So we'll get you back on soon, and yeah, thank you for coming on. It's nice to meet you officially, and yeah, best of luck.
Did you have any last words, Raphael?
Yes, well, I guess in summary, I just say discernment is key, and I'd like to thank you in particular for laying it out straight in that sense, your perspective, and also kind of this logical walkthrough. Very familiar to those that already are engaging in that practice, but it's always a great reminder, and yeah, intellectual honesty, and empiricism especially, I'm all for that. So I'd also just like to thank you also for all the loose threads. Everyone can go research for themselves. That's the entire idea, right? And then I just thank you once again, and thank everyone for listening in.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It was really nice to talk with you.
Well, how about that? I look forward to seeing what I missed and talking to you about it on the YouTube. I'm not going to say amen, hallelujah, aho yet and sign off in the real time. So don't, well, who knows? We'll see.